All right, dude. Appreciate you coming on the show, man. Brad Thomas, Army Ranger, Delta, did all the cool stuff, musician, which I really wish at a young age I would have picked up an instrument. You know what I'm saying? And started playing. My mom probably couldn't afford it. I remember, in middle school, I signed up for a band class and I was like, man, drums, I want to be a drummer because I'm a young kid. I'm a young boy, just wanting to beat the shit out of stuff. And I was like, I want to be a drummer. That'd be cool. But I came to a quick realization. It was like, man, drums are expensive. And there's no way my mom's going to be able to afford this. So I just kind of opted out of that. I really wish, I'm jealous of people that have real musical talent, When did you start playing?
Let's see. So first of all, thanks for having me on.
For sure.
And, it's like to be chatting with you. My musical experience started really at a very young age, I think about 5. And my parents exposed me to live music. And I saw a whole series of what was probably like easy listening, concert series outside of DC where I grew up. And, saw bands like the Beach Boys and Chicago and Barry Manilow and stuff like that. Nice. And, as early as I can remember, had this musical thing where I'd make up songs about whatever, we're driving in the car and my dad's like, oh, that asshole in the Buick. And I'd be, writing a song and singing a song about the guy in the Buick. And, so it's always kind of been a part of me. But as soon as I saw live music, I kind of was like, that's what I want to do. Mm-hmm. And really, didn't do much other than, go to school, played in the woods, kind of all that kind of thing. But started, I guess about 5 on piano and played that, I think for 5 years and did lessons and, would be doing recitals and totally not reading music. I would memorize the song by ear, practice it with the teacher and then just flip the page, like I knew what I was doing. And never really and then started figuring out other songs on the piano. Like I would hear a chord in an Elton John song and I'd be like, that's this, and figure it all out. And that carried into 4th grade when the music program started in the school system that I was in 4th grade. So was in clarinet in the band and saxophone in the band, and then played in my church orchestra, saxophone, and the school band and the pep band and all that kind of thing. And then about, early 1980s, recognized that the stuff that I'm listening to, I can't play on the saxophone. Yeah. And, there aren't really bands at that point in time that were, utilizing horns and stuff like that. So we had a shitty little acoustic guitar in our house and, I think had not enough strings on it, but, managed to figure out notes and playing chords and stuff like that. And that's kind of really where it started.
So you really, you're talking about playing piano, playing saxophone, playing guitar. So it just kind of came to you, huh? Would you say you're like kind of a natural in picking up like musical instruments, or?
I think people are either music people or they're not. And then if you're a music person, you're inclined, to try and create with it. Mm-hmm. Just like I can't draw for shit, right? I wish that I could draw. I wish that I could paint. I wish that I could do art in another form other than music. But I feel like it's one of those things. You're either a music person or you're not. And if you're a music person, you're either inclined to try and create with an instrument or you're not. And, you can learn how to do that stuff, but ultimately, if it's not inside you, it's not your thing.
Yeah.
I see with the advent of YouTube and all things new and technological, kids are able to pick up a guitar and basically be almost virtuoso, like, by the time they're 12. Mm-hmm. And, for me, before the age of cassette tapes and CDs and things like that, it was a needle on a record player. I got Hell's Bells on and, drag the needle back and drop it again. And then, trying to figure it out and learn it. And I think a part of that like gives you your own style, because rarely were you correct in what you were figuring out. Mm-hmm. And you did things in a way that you did them, not in a way some instructional video is teaching you to do it. So anyway, I've always kind of been drawn to the create side of that.
Yeah.
And, not just replicate and try and sound like somebody else. Yeah. So these virtuosos, I know I'm getting long-winded here, the virtuoso players, like, show me a number one song by Steve Vai, or one of these guitar shredder guys. There aren't any. So I'd rather hear a guy that, can pick up the guitar and just create something than somebody who can just, rip it up. And I don't know.
Yeah, for sure, man. I'm saying I love live music. I think seeing live music's awesome. Concerts were a huge part of my teenage years, I guess. I think my first concert I went to was actually in middle school. My dad was in the 377th Combat Support Hospital in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And there in Chattanooga, they do this music festival called Riverbend every year. And the reserve unit that my dad was part of would set up a beer tent and sell beer and stuff to raise funds for the unit, during this concert. And because of that, we all got to get in for free. And, this is probably like early 90s. So my parents would be working this beer tent thing, doing their thing for the unit. And us kids, or what are we going to do? They just give us the pass, the little pin that you'd have to wear. And we're wandering around this festival, and I got to see the Guess Who. I got to see Santana. I got to see these like really awesome concerts. And then as I got older and I was in high school, I was like, I want to go to these concerts. I want to go to more concerts and stuff. And I was really upset. I remember when the first Family Values tour came out, my mom would not let me go to it. I was so mad because I was in high school, and it was like, who was it? Like Korn, Limp Bizkit, like Ice Cube, Orgy, like all these bands. It would have been sick, but she wouldn't let me go. So my first concert as like a young adult was going to a Deep Purple, Ted Nugent, and Leonard Skinner concert in Indianapolis, which was super sick. And I just started going to, multiple concerts a year. So I don't know, man. I love live music, and I love, like you're talking about on YouTube, like the music on YouTube and stuff. Another thing I really like to watch are like these piano, like live piano, when these guys go out to, or public piano, when they just walk up to a public piano and just start playing. And you just see this crowd build around them. And it's like, dude, they all realize that something awesome is happening right in front of them. And I really like that people appreciate that and stop and go, wow, this guy's amazing. I have no idea who this dude is, but wow, that's pretty badass, Do you still play piano and these other instruments, or do you focus on,
No, I, the piano becomes one of those things where it's logistically, I guess I could get a keyboard, but as soon as I picked up the guitar, kind of everything else was backseat and, basically no interest. I can still play like Linus and Lucy, like the Peanuts, I can do stuff like that, cool. But, not having a piano to sit and play on. And when I do have time, it's picking up a guitar and plinking on a guitar, not anything else.
It's a really interesting time for musicians because of like YouTube, because of social media, and like having reels, being able to upload your music and have other people use it as a reel. One thing I used to always hate was that you couldn't put music over videos, or you couldn't put music on posts because you'd get this copyright flag. So once TikTok kind of did their thing, and then everyone started mimicking it. I don't mess with TikTok, but I'm on Instagram and I use Reels. Once that ability to just start putting music over videos, became possible, I was like, this changes everything, because music can really bring out the mood of like, what's in the video, as long as it's done properly.
Yeah, I'm not sure, because I don't generally get on and look at our royalty statements every week or every month or anything like that. But I'd be curious, and our stuff probably doesn't get, used in Reels, not like other artists or acts, right? But I'd be curious as to what form of royalty we collect back on that. So it's got to be something like streaming is totally different than sales, which are different than YouTube plays, which is different than Google Play. They're all kind of different. And so I just haven't looked at a statement to see oh, reels, if somebody uses our music on a reel, what we end up getting from that.
That is interesting because now Instagram specifically is allowing creators of reels, specific creators. I'm opted into the program, but specific creators can get paid for people watching their reels, and
Yeah.
it's not nothing. I can get over $100 a month if I really, if I make a few reels, a few good ones, not even posting every day. I'm talking like 4 reels that are good in a month. I could probably make $100 off that, which is really an interesting thing for the creators of that. But I don't know. I've never actually saw where the money goes for the artist. I guess that's the other bad thing for the artist too. Musicians have a good time now because they can put their stuff out there, but at the same time, their stuff can get ripped off pretty easily as well, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it's
No?
it's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot more difficult than what you would think. As soon as they have like these algorithms that recognize, if you're using a portion of a movie or they'll shut your shit down pretty quickly. I've The only way that I can do it, if you said, hey, I want to use some of your music for the podcast, like I have the master files, so I can send you a file, and therefore giving you permission to use it, and you're not going to get flagged for using it. But anyway, I haven't looked to see what Reels does. So it's funny that you mentioned the monetization thing. I signed up for that, whenever it first came out there, once you're above a certain number of following or whatever. And so I posted a reel and I looked at the monetization thing, and it was like, I don't know, for whatever, 10,000 views or something. I was already at like $70 or something. You can, even if you get like 1 million views, the most it'll pay is $1,200 a month. So it doesn't matter, how big you are, you're not going to get rich off of reels, but
No.
it is going to incentivize you to post more reels. I posted an 8-second video with no audio in my story, not even on my main page, in my story. And it was a video of a uniform that was worn on the Bin Laden raid. And it was just a quick up and down of the uniform. And I wrote uniform worn on UBL raid or something like that. And almost immediately it got taken down. I got, shamed because of something about community guidelines and hate speech.
Really?
Yeah. And they took all of my monetization away for 90 days.
Oh, that.
I didn't want the stupid money anyway. Like, I don't need $70 or anything, but it was like, what did I say that was hate speech? Like, this is a piece of military history.
For sure.
It's not me saying something I shouldn't say about a race of people or a country or anything. It was, hey, here's a piece of military history, and immediately got shut down. And I literally was like, oh man, my account's gone. Like, I've taken years to build a following, years to get all.
That's a big deal for a creator.
Yeah. And anyway, so I was like, I don't want to be under the microscope. Screw all that.
It's frustrating for sure. I actually had one same kind of situation. I had a picture. It was on D-Day. It was a D-Day photo of soldiers holding up Nazi flags, of American soldiers holding up Nazi flags after they had taken the town. And it got flagged and taken down, and I got a warning. I got a strike for it. And then on my Instagram page, Former Action News, where I post a ton of news articles in the stories. I don't post a lot on the actual page, but in the stories every day I probably post 20 news articles just to keep people up to date of what's going on. And one of the stories, it was an interesting one. It was like something about Nazi memorabilia that had been auctioned off, and had gone, like a watch or something had gone for like 150 grand or something like that. And it was like a New York Post article. So I took a screenshot of it and posted it in my stories, and I got flagged for that. And then that was a second time, and they were like, if this happens again, your account gets taken down. And I appealed it and everything like that, and they were like, nope, it goes against the guidelines for hate speech, for this and that. I'm like, it's a fucking news article. Like, what are you talking about? I'm not promoting Nazism or anything like that. Yeah. I just thought, I don't know, man. It's a crazy world like that, though. But
I had the same thing. It was basically threatening to suspend the account, and then I appealed it, and it was like, no, we don't see it that way.
Yeah.
And like, okay, cool.
It's a weird thing, especially for like military accounts, because there's obviously some questionable stuff that can get posted, that we think is just normal, but average people will be like, what the fuck, kind of questionable. So you see a lot of military accounts, pages get throttled or they just get like shadow banned. Like Goons Up is a pretty famous one. That's a big one in the Marine Corps and I guess Army now. He's a former machine gunner. And he has basically this cult following. He's like the the godfather of machine guns in the Marine Corps right now. And even though you can't go on his page and find it, or go on Instagram and find it unless you type in the exact thing, Goons _ 5 times, because he's had to make his page over and over again, up, then it'll pop up. But before that, it won't even show up. Even with all that, he still has over 100,000 followers. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, some guys are able to work around it, but it's an issue for people that are just posting. I mean, like, it's historical stuff. When we're talking about Ukraine stuff, that's current events. It's news. It's stuff like that. Obviously, people need to be a little cautious. You don't need to be throwing like dead bodies or people getting blown up or something crazy graphic on there. But
I think for me, the frustrating part is, I can see the analytics and see how many accounts I reach with what and that type of thing. And I'm sure you can too.
For sure.
I can see periods of time where it's almost like the gates are open.
Mm-hmm.
And my stuff is seeing like an insane amount of people, at least in my mind, it's an insane amount of people. And other times where it's just like you see the clampdown happening.
Mm-hmm.
I posted anything political. I believe in the thing that I'm doing. I'm trying to bring people together. I don't care if you're this or that or whatever. It's all about, hey, we're trying to do something positive, creative, healthy, that gives back to the community.
For sure.
And it's not about being divisive or can you believe this person said this or any of that. I've never posted anything political in any way, shape, or form. And so it kind of sucks when you get rolled up into this, okay, I don't really know what I did or said, but anyway.
Yeah, it's a weird game. I'm in digital marketing. That's kind of my what I do, my day job, I guess. So I deal with that a lot, and it's frustrating sometimes. And I know what you're talking about. It's funny, if I look at my YouTube analytics, between 1 and 5 o'clock, my views always spike. There's always this massive spike where they like double, and it's like, I don't know if it's just when the algorithm like clicks for me or, like that's the set times for my page to like spike. There's always a constant, views going on, but then there's this like boom and it spikes and doubles or triples. And it's kind of wild to watch every time. But yeah, man, moving on to the military and stuff, what made you decide to join the military? Did you consider the band, when you were thinking about military service?
Yeah, funny. So as soon as, I turned 18, I was in college for classical guitar / music major.
Mm-hmm.
And, really it was because I didn't really have anything else going on and was trying to do the band thing and play out and all that jazz. And, it was kind of the next thing that I could do that could continue me, some way being involved with music outside of, playing music and being in bands. The military was never really a thing. I got probably about the time that I was 12, 13, started reading, Rangers in Vietnam books and some SOG stuff and things like that. And it was a brief interest. It wasn't something that I was, oh man, I'm going to do this. And that's all I've ever wanted to be. December of '89 was really kind of when it all came to a head. And there were 3 things that happened. The first thing was the Rangers jumped into Panama and was over at a bandmate's house, and we were writing music and screwing around. And I think CNN was a thing, or it was just, cable news was just becoming a thing. But there was a little bit of footage from what was going on in Panama. And I remember thinking like, oh man, America sent airborne Rangers to such and such. Like, holy crap, this is like, we're not screwing around.
Yeah.
And so that kind of piqued my interest. That was one of the things. The second thing was the band that I was in just kind of dissolved and fell apart. And, it takes a lot of time to put together a group of people that are like-minded, that all have the same kind of shared goals and, style of music, especially like singers, a really tough thing to find. And if you have music that's already out, like you're kind of stuck with what you got. Like you're going to have to find a guy that can sing like your old singer, or really tough. Singer's always the hardest thing to find. So that kind of fell apart. And the third thing was a buddy of mine had joined the Air Force, and I had nobody in my family was in the military. So it's not like I had any sort of knowledge or inside track on anything. A buddy of mine had joined the Air Force, and he was home for Christmas Exodus and had just finished AIT. And he said, yeah, there were these guys that came around and recruited at the end of basic training for like some special unit that jumps in behind enemy lines and rescues down pilots. And so all of a sudden it was like, ooh, that kind of sounds cool.
Yeah.
So those three things happened probably within a month or two. I was talking with the Air Force recruiter, and that's kind of where it started.
So it's weird. It's interesting talking to people that joined the military pre-internet, because like you said, the only way you could really find out about it is if you had family that was in the military or if you read different books. My dad was obviously in the Army. I got multiple members of my family were in the military. But I also read Carlos Hathcock's Marine Sniper. And that's what really, because before I was like Army Rangers, my dad was in the Army. I was like, that sounds awesome. And then I read Marine Sniper and I'm like, Marines, that sounds way cooler, Did you find it hard to find information out about the military, about what you were wanting to do or what options were out there in that time frame? You said you read some books about Rangers in Vietnam. Was it the old LERP books?
Yeah, there were probably some LERP books. I think one was like, Special Forces, and they were operating out of these base camps. There was another one that I read that was a CIA operative that was over there, working behind the scenes to make stuff happen. All of it, I think, was fiction. I don't think I was reading any true story at that time. And anyway, so it was just kind of an interest. And when those three things happened, then I went to go see the recruiter. One of the things that I didn't really understand was, there were contracts and there were not contracts, and depending on MOSs, and I didn't even really understand what an MOS was. Again, there's like no place that you could look up photos of things or to see what, go to the library and maybe encyclopedias or something like that. But it's zero information. So I go to the Air Force recruiter and he's like, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I heard about this unit that does this mission, rescuing down pilots, and that's what I want to do. And he was like, okay, well, you have to take the ASVAB and we'll see if you qualify, blah, 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 blah. And the guy totally lied to me. He was like, we'll get you a contract. Okay, cool. So I take the ASVAB, I qualify for everything that I need to qualify for. And I'm like, now what about the contract? Well, we don't really, offer the contract. And I was like, I understand that you can't guarantee me the right to serve in this unit because like you've got to go through, I imagine there's like some sort of, selection process or something, but I just want to be guaranteed the right to try. Like, I don't know how this works. I'm in basic training and they go, oh, hey, Thomas, we need a guy in Louisiana to go flip burgers. You're going. Like, I don't know how it works, but I didn't want that to happen. So he and I go back and forth. He basically lies and says, if you sign on the dotted line, I'll get you a contract and make sure that, you're guaranteed this. So I sign. And I'm leaving one day after, going back and trying to get something out of him for a couple of weeks. And the Army recruiter is standing there in the hallway and he goes, hey, man, what the fuck are you doing? And I was like, what? And he goes, what's going on over there? Like, you're here every week. What's going on? And I said, well, he won't give me a contract. And, all I'm trying to do is, get a contract from him. And he's telling me that he's going to do it. And he's like, no. What do you want to do? And I said, I don't know, Delta Force. And he's like, he laughs and he goes, well, you can't do that. You got to do something before that, like Special Forces. And I go, okay, I'll do that. And he goes, well, you can't do that either. you got to do something before that, like a Ranger. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And he goes, I can get you a contract for that today. And that's how that journey kind of began. The longer story, and I could tell it very quickly, he was like, hey, can't say anything to anybody about this, especially don't tell the Air Force guy, but I'll drive you down to Andrews Air Force Base. You have to have this full bird colonel sign off on your paperwork to get you out of your enlistment in the Air Force. And I was like, okay, cool. So he drives me down there, and I finally get into this guy's office, and I'm like some long-haired, dope smoking, and he's screaming and yelling at me, this is the worst mistake you're ever gonna, you're ever gonna do. Like, the Air Force is so much better than all of the other services. Blah 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 blah.
Was this
blah.
an Air Force colonel?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do it there. Just like sign my paperwork so I can get out of here.
Yeah.
And anyway, so that was kind of where that came from. Went back to the Army. Guy gave me a contract the next day. I was in delayed enlistment. That was like May of 1990, and I came in November of 90.
It's so weird. Like, it's the stigma of the recruiters lying to, potential recruits is there because it happens all the time. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's such a bad thing that occurs I kind of had a similar situation where I came and I wanted to do infantry in the Marines, and it had taken me a couple tries to get in. I got arrested and shit, so I got put on delay and stuff like that. So by the time it was like, okay, this can actually happen, they kind of put me between a rock and a hard place. They were like, yeah, no, you can go infantry. We're going to get you an infantry contract. Kind of like what they're telling you. Like, yeah, we'll get the contract. It'll come. Just keep checking in with us. And it got all the way to the date, like the day before I'm about to go to boot camp. And I'm like, hey, where's this contract? And I remember talking to another recruiter because mine wasn't there. And I called and I was like, I'm supposed to be leaving tomorrow. Like, where's the contract? And the guy was like, no, it's all good, man. When you come down, we'll get all the paperwork signed. I'm like, all right, cool. And he completely lied to me. So I get down to MEPS thinking I'm leaving to go to boot camp and go into infantry and stuff. And they're like, so what job do you want to do? And I'm like, what do you mean, what job do I want to do? Infantry. And they're like, well, you could do infantry, but you have to wait a few months, but we have all these other options like admin, supply, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't want to do any of that. And they're like, well, The other way to get into infantry is to go open contract. And I'm like, that sounds like a horrible idea. I was like, I could become a fucking cook or a fucking mechanic, which is exactly what I said. But at the time, they're like, if you want to leave today, you have to either pick one of these jobs or go open contract. And I had sold my car, quit my job, moved out of my apartment. Like, this was like me, I'm heading down there to go to boot camp and, go to the rest of my life. So I was like I had just found out my girlfriend at the time was 3 months pregnant. I was like, I'm between a real rock and a hard place here. And I knew I shouldn't do it. And I signed an open contract, and I ended up becoming a fucking mechanic for 3 years and was just miserable. And it's like, dude, it doesn't have to be that way. I know it's the needs of the military and stuff, but I don't know, man. When you put a bad taste in someone's mouth, like I went and I tried to be a good mechanic and shit like that, but I was just miserable the whole time because I was looking at the guys doing the stuff I wanted to do and thinking like, man, this sucks. This isn't what I joined for. So it's such a weird thing. And like we were talking before about social media, kids nowadays can literally know the exact job they want and the unit that they want because there's so much information out there. Pages like Goons Up. You can go on there and see what a machine gunner in the Marine Corps does or what a mortarman in the Army does. It's like the information's there. It's such a different world now.
There's a meme, and I've posted it in my story a time or two. And just when you said that, you were talking about the kids that can, like they know exactly where they're going to go.
Yeah.
And a couple of kids sitting around on a couch, like they're maybe 6 or 7 years old or whatever. And one of them's like, yeah, bud, such and such, you think it's like they're like picking apart like which service they're going to get into, at such a young age.
Yeah.
I think it's a great resource, and it's cool that they can see some of the magic, and whether that's being a helicopter mechanic or whether it's petroleum transfer technician or whatever, like, man, you can be anything, and you can kind of really get a good idea. And when when the recruiter told me, we've got this Ranger thing for you, sure. He put not even a DVD. This is like VHS tape.
Hell yeah.
Into the VCR, and it was like a video of Ranger School. It wasn't even, Ranger Regiment. It had nothing to do with anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was just about that time where, special operations was starting to recognize that it needed to have some sort of recruiting and ability to show kids, hey, you can come and do this thing. And so interestingly, I got there in April of 91, so went through basic AIT, airborne school, the Ranger indoctrination program, and then by April of 91, got assigned to B Company 3rd Ranger Battalion. And the fall of 91, I was in Ranger school, but our company shot a video for the Discovery Channel called Rangers in Action. And, that was really kind of the first foray into, showing behind the scenes, like you weren't allowed to talk about the RSOV vehicle, the Ranger Special Operations vehicle, and the fact that it had gun mounts on it and guns on it that had thermal night vision and, like all this super secret stuff. And even though nobody was like making you sign an NDA, nobody really knew what was secret or what wasn't secret or anything. But, the fact that you jumped tailgate out of a certain type of aircraft was, can't talk about that. And anyway, we ended up putting, 90% of it on the Discovery Channel for people to see, which I think was kind of cool because it probably, was an outlet for people that were interested to figure out, oh, that's something I want to do, or no, I want to do something different.
Yeah. So when you were there and you were going through your training, was your initial training still going on when the Gulf War kicked off?
Yeah. So this is where it gets kind of interesting. When I came in like November 13th of 90, and when I left for basic and AIT, it was basically like, hey, I'm going to be back in 5 weeks for Christmas vacation.
Mm-hmm.
They had told me, hey, from the 17th or 18th of the December to like the 3rd of January, you're going to be back home. I got to basic, and within a week or so, they canceled our Christmas exodus. And, things were ramping up pretty quickly for the whole invasion. And at that time, it was still Desert Storm or Desert Shield. It wasn't yet Desert Storm. So I had just started like our field problem in AIT when Desert Storm kicked off in February of 91. So in November, when they canceled our Christmas vacation, they literally got every basic training company that was on Sand Hill at Fort Benning, and they put us in this gigantic formation, and some colonel came out and said, men, needs of the Army have changed. You're all going to be mechanized. You think that you're going to, go to airborne school and do all that. Nope, ain't going to happen. You're going to be riding in the back of a Bradley fighting vehicle over in Iraq in a matter of months, so prepare for war and blah, 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 blah. And I was kind of like, oh man, this is shitty. Like, that's not what I signed up to do. And I figured if we're going to have sustained war, like I'm going to be at the Rangers and I'm going to go there and who knows what. Anyway, it took a couple of days, but our drill sergeants came and pulled all of the guys. I was one of them that had a Ranger contract. They pulled us aside. There were 12 of us in the company. And he said, they can't mess with you guys. You guys are, this contract, you're locked in. You're going to go to airborne school. You're going to stay 11 Bravo. Everybody else is going to be reassigned to either 11 Hotel, which was a tow gunner on a Humvee. You're either going to be 11 Hotel or 11 Mike, and you're going to be, riding in the back of a Bradley fighting vehicle. And that's exactly what happened. Everybody got switched, and me and the Ranger guys and other people, maybe that had airborne contracts, but our contracts were honored.
That's crazy because they all had their jobs switched, and by the time they probably got to their units, the war was already over. So everybody that had what, they went in for a certain reason, all that just got turned on its head.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting because, like I said, I wanted to be locked into something. I didn't want there to be open-ended, somebody can not give me my shot. I at least wanted the shot to try at whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And there were guys when I got to basic that had come in and had like, $15,000 bonuses and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, my recruiter screwed me. I could have come in unassigned airborne, gotten a bonus, and then at the end of airborne school, I could have just volunteered for Ranger Indoctrination Program, and I would have gotten the bonus, and I still would have gotten to go to the Ranger Regiment. But it didn't work out that way because of exactly what had happened.
That's wild. Were you bummed out when the war ended? Were you like, oh, we missed it? Like, dang.
No, I think, interestingly, my son just finished basic and airborne or basic and AIT and all of that. And it's kind of cool to hear, 33 years later or whatever, he's telling me stories about when he got the chance to use the phone, he would call and he'd be like, what's going on in Ukraine? I heard we're going there. And so the drills are very much like, hey, you need to take this seriously because you guys are going to go fight. And this just happened in Somalia, and this just happened in Russia. China is going to invade Taiwan, and like they're telling them all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of interesting because I don't think any of us felt like, oh man, we're going to go fight in a war. Like that era, there just weren't any wars. You know, we had Grenada in '83. We had Panama in '89, and here it is 91, and this thing was over in a matter of days. And so I don't think we were bummed out so much as like, okay, when's the next thing going to happen?
Yeah. It was an interesting time, right? That's the almost that Cold War era veterans. Some of those dudes kind of have a chip on their shoulder, it seems like, when you talk to some of them, because they were in that time frame where there was nothing going on. All their seniors were guys that were in Vietnam, so they hear those dudes' stories, and then they were in for a decade or whatever, and then nothing happened really no major things happened up until the Gulf War. When I say major, like involving everybody. I don't know. What was it like coming in the late 80s? Was there, you hear about there was drug problems in the military. There were like all these issues because it was a peacetime military and the retention wasn't as good because, it's people may not like to hear it, but if there's a war going on, there's dudes that stay in just because there's a war going on. Like that's all, they just want to go deploy, that's why they joined and that's what they want to do. And if that's not happening, and they're just coming into work every day to practice and get yelled at and whatever, but never get to go to the game, like why would someone want to keep doing that? And a lot of people get disgruntled and get out and whatever. What was kind of the vibe of the military at the time when you came in?
Well, I think to answer one of the things you just said is like, that's one of the things that social media has caused also is all these glamorous shots of combat and the gear and guy overseas doing whatever it is that he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is like being in the military is about service, whether it's serving during wartime or whether it's saying, hey, I'm willing to be prepared to go anywhere that you could send me in defense of the nation. That's what it's really about.
Mm-hmm.
I say this on almost every podcast that I've done and any media that I do. I know far more people that died in training than died in combat. And I mean, not even close.
Wow, really?
Oh, yeah. That's the way that it was. And it's a very dangerous business. So, you could die in a parachute accident as easily as you could die from a gunshot wound, in combat. Does that make this guy's service any less, does that make somebody's sacrifice any less? They were willing to give their life in defense of the nation and, to be prepared to go do this thing. So I get it. At the same time, for my whole era of guy, all my peers and everything else, most of the people that came in the Rangers when I did were in to do 4 years and get out, either get their college paid for, or, they were going to go back home and be a game warden and, whatever it might be. There weren't a ton of career people, but once you get there, you kind of realize, oh, there are these little things that pop up, and maybe we'll be the company or the battalion that gets picked, or maybe it'll be the whole Ranger Regiment that goes, like in Panama and in Grenada. And so you're kind of, everything that you're doing is in preparation of that moment where they break the glass and they say, we need to send somebody in to do X, you're ready to do it.
Yeah.
And, interestingly too, I have this conversation, and it's not an answer to your question necessarily, but I have this conversation a lot with current guys, senior guys that I know, people of my era that, served in peacetime and wartime military and got to see kind of the best of both worlds. And the question is, was it harder back then than it is now? And harder, by the way, doesn't equate to better. It's just saying harder. And I always say the same thing, and that is, we didn't know what we were doing back then. In 1991, there was no PT program that got guys into shape. It was the only way to kind of see if a dude was, mentally tough enough to go into battle or whatever, was just to abuse people, hazing and, running them to death in the morning. And if they fell out of the run in the morning, we're going to run you again in the afternoon. And, it was physically demanding. And when I look back at everything that I did in the military, whether it was Delta selection, whether, combat, whatever, the hardest time that I had was that first year and a half in the Ranger Battalion. And the stuff that we were doing to prepare, for war, living in the swamps every week, doing all kinds of stuff, like barely eating. It was rough. And like I said, harder doesn't mean better. It was also, we weren't smart about things, so we were walking around probably operating at 80% because we were so broken down all the time. The logistics of things, like a company to draw weapons was hours long process, go down to the arms room, stand in line, by platoon, by squad, get screwed with the whole time you're standing in line, right? So hours worth of just, people fucking with you and things like that, to get up, to copy your serial number down, sign your name. Oh, you signed in the wrong line. You got to do another one. Just drawing weapons from the company arms room was an hours long process. And now that's, boop, boop,
yeah, here's my weapons card. Give him my gun.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where I feel like just to have survived back then was a very tough thing to do. And, especially considering there was no real payoff, i.e. combat.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things, right? I guess at the time you guys are probably trying to improve on, I don't know. I mean, you guys are probably studying old tactics, right? And using untested theories also. Like any kind of new things that you guys are doing haven't been tested at that point. Where right now, or the last 20 years, any kind of theory we had on a certain type of how to attack a target, we figure that out pretty quickly. It actually gets put in play in real life with real adversary, and we go, wow, that was really effective, or wow, we shouldn't do that again. Yeah.
Okay. Rangers jump onto an airfield to secure it in Panama, and when do you get to practice that again for real?
Yeah, and that's another reason we talked
years later.
Yeah, and that's another reason we talked a little bit before we started about sharing legacies and stuff like that. And that's another reason why I think these podcasts are really important, because it's like this kind of institutional knowledge gets forgotten. People forget, and the guys that did these things become the old guys that are sergeant majors that can't worry about that kind of thing, or they're retired, and it's not, there's that base of knowledge isn't there anymore. And to be honest, and I've said this multiple times on the podcast, AARs, the after action reviews in the military, a lot of times are kind of sanitized to make the commander not look bad. It's always a victory. It was always like, this was a success. This was great. We did this. And there's not a lot of like realistic, at the tactical level, like here's where we could really, improve by trying this technique rather than this technique, I guess. I don't know. So I that's another reason why I like recording these conversations and stuff, because it's important. It's institutional knowledge and it's history that needs to be taken down.
Yeah. I'm not like a person that believes, standing in formation and looking sharp and all that stuff is something that makes, I was never subscribed to that while I was in, let alone, now looking back at it. The one thing I'll say is that all of that stuff, that super painful attention to detail stuff, it made us do everything to the best of our ability. Whether it was putting together your dress uniform for the Ranger Ball, whether it was, shining the hallway and buffing the hallway as a private, whatever it was, we did it to the best of our ability. And if you didn't, you were going to pay for it. And, I think that it was conveyed to me back then as these little attention to detail things are going to be what keeps you alive in combat.
Mm-hmm.
I drew no parallel to that. Like, you could tell me that all day long. I don't believe it. Like, what's going to keep me alive in combat is either, tactics and doing the right thing, or, luck, not luck, whatever it might be, bad luck. But the fact that I blacken the eyelets on my boots because they're silver I don't feel like going to be the thing that keeps me alive in combat. If it had been portrayed as, this is going to teach you to do everything that you're asked to do to the best of your ability, I can sign up for that. Like, that makes sense. But anyway, when I look at that stuff now, if I'm at the Rangers, visiting or whatever it might be, and I see these guys walking around, like, man, there's no military bearing about it at all. And I don't want to be the old crusty guy that's like, hey, Stacey, you're looking sharp. What the hell?
Back in my day.
However, there is this one little thing in the Ranger Creed that says, your military appearance, and, she'll set the example for others to follow. And I look at that and I go, I don't, at the same time, I understand when you're deploying for 20 years and you're not having formations and, hey, we're getting ready to roll out and I don't need to blouse my boots and all of that. I was the person that it took me 8 years to get to a place where I could roll up my sleeves and unblouse my boots. 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
And now we almost kind of give it away. And, so I feel like that thing is lost, whatever that thing is.
It's funny that is like, that's like when you made it. You're like, oh, I can put my hands in my pockets and no one's going to yell at me. It's like these stupid little things in the military. You're like, I'm going to go through all these crazy selection. I'm going to become the super badass just so I can put my hands in my pockets and grow a beard.
Yeah. Hey, look, my buttons are unbuttoned. Who cares?
Yeah. I'm all about it. I know what you're talking about, man. I was very much a field Marine. I could not stand. I mean, I'm all, don't look like a piece of shit. If you need a haircut, go get a haircut. If your uniform is fucked up, fix it kind of deal. But I'm not, there were guys that were like, why is your boot not bloused between your second and third eyelid of your boot? Like, what are you talking about, dude? That's not even in the order. Like, guys that, they think being like super into the regulations and stuff is what is motivating or something. I don't know. I don't know. It always seemed like guys that never really got to go do cool stuff were really into like yelling at people and like really into like uniforms and, like people have their inspection camis and shit. I'm like, inspection camis, bro. This is a work uniform. I remember getting on ship for my second MEU, I think. And it was like the first day on ship, and it's like when you're on ship, you're on ship. There's nothing. You're kind of cut off from access from anything. And it was the first day the CO came out and did his like, hey, we're going on deployment speech. And the sergeant major was like, hey, don't, his motivating speech was, make sure uniforms are squared away and blah, blah, blah while we're still on ship. And then after we got dismissed from that, I'm walking back to my berthing area. I'm walking across the flight deck, and the sergeant major walks by me and he goes, your camis are too faded. Get rid of them and get a new pair. And I'm like, from where? We're on ship. And the fucked up part was I had 2 sets of, I think, desert camis or whatever with me. And that was my least faded set. My other ones were like almost white or whatever. And I was like, what the fuck? But in my own mind, I'm like, why does he care about that? Like, why is that a big deal? You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. It was very frustrating sometimes because it was like, some people put a lot into the pomp and circumstance of the military and the rules and regulations. And, there's a time and place for it for sure. And then, but there were people that were so into that they were more focused on that and less focused on mission accomplishment. Sure. I would much rather you come in with your boots being fucked up, but you can come in and give me a target location within 200 meters in 2 minutes or less. That's what we expected from our forward observers with a map and compass. If you can do that, then I'd much rather you come in and be able to do that than you come in and have a nice uniform, but you can't do your job. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's I guess what I'm saying is like talking with people nowadays about, was it harder back then? Harder doesn't mean better.
Yeah.
People, they always think that harder means better. And, that's the kind of stuff you were dealing with. So if the duty day ended at, we'll say 1630 was our last formation in the Rangers, like when I got there, we had, 3 or 4 formations a day where they would assign everything because there was no computer to send emails.
Yeah.
There was nothing like that. So, at formation, you get assigned, hey, this is what we got going on or whatever. The last formation of the day would be at like 4:30 in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
And we generally end up sitting around waiting on the word until, 6 o'clock, 6:30 at night.
Hell yeah.
Then it was like a mad dash to get to Ranger Joe's to pick up your starches for the next day because you got your balls smoked off in your starches that day. They were soaking wet from sweat and your spits were ruined. So
when you say is that a service uniform that you're talking about, or is that camis?
We had 2 options. Like the dress uniform was never a thing except for Ranger Ball. We had what we called fluff and buff, which was your field uniform, not pressed, just kiwi boots, not shined or anything else. And then we had what we called starch and spits, and that was spit shine boots, starch uniform, beret.
Okay.
And so if you were going out anywhere on post, there was no civilian clothes. It was starch and spits. And if you were in starch and spits, you got inspected by your team leader and or squad leader before you went out to make sure that you were squared away looking.
I'm glad we don't do that anymore.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. Right. So anyway, just to maintain the duty uniform was like a feat in itself. Mm-hmm. So you get done at the end of the day, you're sitting around waiting on the word, which was always, hey, 6 o'clock first call, 6:30 PT. And then, oh, go figure. So you'd run out to Ranger Joe's, you'd pick up your starch uniform, you'd get it back, you'd have, hit the Burger King or whatever to get something to eat. And, make sure your spits were squared away for the next day's formation, maybe have a beer or 2
mm-hmm.
and watch a movie, go to bed and do it all over again. That was kind of the typical duty day. In the field was something, totally different. But, the implied tasks, right, of just having a squared away uniform, like it's super deep. Oh, you just got promoted to PFC. Now you need to go get your rank sewn on and got to have that all taken care of. It's just all of that jazz. So
mm-hmm.
harder, not better, but, just the amount of stuff. And then on top of that, we got to make sure the barracks is squared away. Your room is getting inspected. Like your barracks room is not separate from your work environment. Like I'm in a 4-man room, which was also our squad room. So all of the squad business is happening in my room all day long. Other Ranger privates are getting smoked in my room and leaving black scuff marks all over the floor. So that's got to get squared away at some point before, it's just all of that. And anyway, so when I look back at it, I don't think that's the way it should be. I think that's where the military is definitely headed in the next few years.
Yeah.
Like, it's not going to be all about combat and beards and all that kind of jazz. Like, it's very much going to get back to, the pomp and circumstance, like you mentioned.
Yeah, for sure. That's I feel like I got out at a really good time. I got out in 2018. I was coming up on my 12-year mark, and I was like, either I get out now or I stay until 20, And I got out right before like COVID happened, like the wars are ending, and for me it was just like, I can't just sit here and exist in this space and get yelled at by people. Like, if I'm gonna be like writing a desk because I'm starting to get more senior and stuff, then I'm gonna do it in the real world. You know what I'm saying? Like, where someone's not yelling at me for putting my hands in my pockets, because that's like, it's just so asinine to me that it's like, I'm a grown man. I'll go get my hair cut. Like, I know when to go get my hair cut, I don't know. It was just very frustrating. Some things don't ever change. Some things in the military don't ever change. And, there has to be some of that. And I get it. And there'll probably be some first sergeants or sergeants major out there that hears this and, disagree with it. But I understand where they're coming from too, where my mindset is I was working on small teams with like my forward observer teams when I was with artillery, and then with my Anglico teams when I was with Anglico. And we were kind of OFP, kind of doing our thing, the fire support guys thing. And I get it when they're talking about trying to manage 1,000 18 to 22-year-olds in a battalion, and it's just like, you can't let a dude just be a dude because he's going to fuck it up. There's just too many people there that's going to mess it up for it to. So it's a double-edged sword, I guess, kind of letting things relax a little bit to give guys a better kind of living experience, I guess, but it's not going to be great necessarily for good order and discipline.
And it ebbs and flows.
For sure.
Like, politically, I don't think anybody pre 24-hour cable news was into politics or followed politics or anything else. And, I came in under Bush, and, everything that we were doing at that time was very, Colombia, Central America, anti-drug, drug interdiction type of stuff. That changed under Clinton, and funding changed. You could see things kind of ebb and flow. Mm-hmm. And then I think during Clinton was don't ask, don't tell, and then that got repealed when the next Bush comes in. It's just like it bounces back and forth, and I think that you have to be somewhat flexible. I think we're probably in that post-Vietnam era kind of time. Like, it's the 19s in a lot of ways. Our society, even the same way, it's like we're very divided. We've got this like, not that we've got anti-war stuff. I feel like America has been, very respectful of service members. Maybe not, the politicians that are, prosecuting things, but and I don't feel like we're very much in the 1970s. So my son, who just joined, I look at him, he doesn't know any better. He never deployed. It's not like he's going from, this type of military to that type of military. Sure. I imagine his senior leaders are all going to have had combat experience, but that's what it was like when I got there. I got to the Rangers basically a year after Panama had happened. And so even private first class, in my platoon, there were guys that had a CIB and a combat scroll and combat jump and things like that. And it was, they knew the deal, and they had been there and been in gunfights and all of that stuff. And there were all of us that hadn't, but he'll be in that kind of same boat. So I've told him and his friends, they all asked me, like, when I went down to see him during basic training and stuff, do you think we're going to get into some kind of war anytime? I'm like, dude, we just did 20 something years of war. I don't think that anybody's itching to get back into it. And I think there are going to be these small things that pop up, and be prepared to, or get sent, to the Balkans, to be prepared to something, over that, but there's not going to be any major conflict anytime soon, unless world events, we never know when a 9/11 could happen or something like that. It changes everything. But I don't think that there are any big plans for anything. So your job and I tell them, hey, your job right now is just to be prepared. You volunteered to be in the service, to do whatever job it is that you're going to go do, and whatever unit you're going to do it in, and be prepared and to the best of your ability so that when the glass gets broken and there's an emergency, you're ready to go do it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. One thing I've talked about a lot on the podcast, and I've told people, and it's always humbling for me to, especially talking to someone like you that's done so many things. It's like, don't judge your service up against somebody else's, because there's always somebody that's done more than you. There's always someone out there that's way cooler than you, and it's like, it's easy to go, well, I didn't really do anything because of blah, blah, blah. But the reality is, like you said, you signed up, you didn't know what you were going to get into, especially if you're in a combat arms job. There's a real possibility over the last 20 years that you could be deployed and that you could be in actual combat, so it's guys, people will start to want for war, I guess, like, oh man, I hope we get to go, guys that haven't done it, like, hey, let's, that'd be cool, we get into the war and stuff. But it's like, it's one of those things, it's like, careful what you ask for, man, because it gets real fast. It's not always that great. Did you see the other day, just a couple days ago, there was an Air Force general that came out and said that he believes we're going to be at a war with China in 2025?
I saw the headline, but I didn't read the article. And it kind of took me by surprise too.
I think he was just talking to a group, and that was like one of his things, like, hey, you need to be ready, because the reality is this could be a real possibility, kind of. And I was like, wow, that's kind of, I couldn't believe that. He would, I can't imagine a general saying that in an open forum where it's going to get picked up by the press. Because what do you think China's doing with that? Like, they're taking that and going, look, the Americans are planning to fight us in 2025 kind of deal.
I feel like Americans are very naive if they don't think that we're already electronically engaged in war with China.
Yeah, war is different now for sure than it was. And I think we're seeing I don't keep up with the Army as much because I was in the Marines, but I know the Marines kind of shifting. You're seeing these, what do they call them, like all domain teams and stuff like that are talking about, fighting in cyberspace, fighting on the ground, and bringing it. Combined arms now includes electronic warfare and like digital attacks and stuff that will also help the guy on the ground that 20 years ago would not even been a thought of, because of the way of technology.
That's one of the things. So when my son called me from basic and, basically was like stressing that he was going to end up in war in China, when he graduated basic training, I was like, how do we even logistically ramp up for that? Where do we park our carriers? Where are we, going to have this big, like, dude, they could smoke anything we put over there, So I don't even feel like that's, like, it's even a possibility in terms of war as the way we think of war for the last 21 years.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, that's what we think of as war. And that's what I'm saying is, I feel like electronically we've been engaged with them for a long time. Mm-hmm. And if you don't think we are, whether it be election meddling, whether it be, psyops and putting out the word in different ways and mechanisms, like I'm sure all of that stuff is going on. The same way I feel like they're probably, disrupting things and trying to do things here. Mm-hmm. I think that there's, to some degree, some mutually assured destruction. Like, I'm sure that we could take out their grid and we could take out their internet and their ability to communicate and everything else, just like I'm sure they could do it to us. And so probably, at some point, like, we could shut down banking. Can you imagine, like, banking today is basically numbers on your phone.
Yeah, 100%.
Really isn't anything else. It's like, I'm going to transfer these numbers from here to these numbers over here to pay for it. It really is not the same thing. So imagine I've got the ability to just drop all your numbers, turn to zero. How do you, can you imagine the disruption in the country if we just had the ability to make everybody have zeros?
Yeah, that would mass panic. Mass panic. What would happen with something like that? Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I think there's
10%. Like, let's just reduce that. Let's just say 10% or two of the major banks just get zeroized. Like, imagine what that would do.
yeah,
Like,
trust in the economic system would, be immediately gone. I guess that's where the Bitcoin people come into play, right? Uh, I asked Andrew Bustamante, who was on the podcast a few episodes ago. He's a former CIA guy, who did whatever. I was like, how can you? I was like, people doing what you did for the CIA in other countries. If they were doing that here, we would call them terrorists. We'd call them whatever. How do you? What goes through your mind when you're overseas doing one of these operations that we would call other countries bad for doing? What's the difference between us and them? What makes us the good guys and stuff? What's your take on that? Because you weren't in the CIA or anything like that, but you did. I would imagine that like Iran would probably say Delta Force is a terrorist organization, a U.S. terrorist organization, because of some of the missions that they would do. How do you like in your own mind say, hey, we do this because, how do you justify it? I guess, you know what I'm saying?
Let's see. I think without getting into any great details, I feel like, looking back on it is probably different than while I was living it.
Mm-hmm.
So my answer today would probably a lot different than what my answer would have been at other times. But when I've been asked kind of similar questions, like people tend to see an issue or they see something through the media and they get emotional about it in a way that I feel is kind of naive. Like, and I don't want to name any specific examples. There's a large part of war that I can understand is really business, and I think if you can't understand that war, it's not really us fighting the bad guys as much as it could be about business and about money, financial gain and power and things like that. And I'm not some conspiracy kook with all kinds of crazy theories and everything else, but I feel like, and I'm not suggesting that the Iraq war was about oil or anything like that. I feel like decisions get made that aren't as altruistic as what we think that they are.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a person that believes what you're seeing is the ground truth, then I think you're naive. Politically speaking, when the thing in Iraq really kind of started because Saddam was threatening to sell WMD to Al Qaeda, or could potentially sell, bio weapons to Al Qaeda or who knows who, and it be used in a way against us. And so pretty much everybody but 2 congressmen or 2 senators voted for the use of power.
Mm-hmm.
And we're a very united country. And it wasn't until, 2005, just 2 years later, that it was very politicized to damage a president. That's it. Everybody was behind it. And then all of a sudden, at some point, he lied and it got turned into, that was all a big lie to the intelligence community and blah, 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 blah. I feel like there are probably greater things pulling strings than just what you see. And probably doesn't answer your question at all, but I feel like there's a part of it that's just, hey, they told me that I need to go do this. My country's asking me to go do this. I'm going to go do this.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, oh my God, these people are so bad that they could hurt them. It's a weird thing. I think there are a lot of decisions that are made that are based on nothing more than business and economy and global hour and things along those lines. So
Well, I think if people aren't aware of that going on, one, like you said, they're naive. Two, they should really look at Africa right now, because of all the minerals and stuff like that. China is trying to do their Silk Road. They're in there trying to basically bribe countries to let them build infrastructure in their countries. Or they're like, hey, we'll loan you this billions of dollars to build dams across your country and to help your infrastructure, but you have to pay us back within a certain amount of time that they can never pay them back by. And then they're like, oh, you defaulted, so now we're taking control of all this stuff. And again, the U.S. is in Africa doing their own thing, and I think a lot of people didn't realize that the U.S. was actively doing stuff in Africa until those Green Beret soldiers were killed, like 4 years ago or something, around, I think, was it in Mali or Niger? I think it was in Niger, actually. Yeah, there's a lot going on out there that people don't realize, and it's like, hey, we want electric vehicles. Where does that shit come from to make these batteries? Well, that comes from Africa mostly. Do we want to be in control of that stuff to make all these batteries that everybody needs suddenly, or do we want to let China be in control of that? And then, how does that play out? I mean, this isn't an unknown thing. Smedley Butler wrote War is a Racket, back in the day, back in the early 1900s. After winning or receiving 2 Medals of Honor, he came out and said that, most of his fighting he felt was done for different corporations rather than for the security of the country kind of deal. I don't know, man. It's a weird thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, there is a very altruistic and just component to it, and for me, I personally started to feel like I was being utilized in a manner in which I didn't agree with. And that was at the point in time where I'm like, I need to go, do something else and retire and no longer do this thing, because I get to a point where I don't believe in it necessarily.
Man, that's a bummer, dude. And you retired from Delta, right?
Yeah.
That's a bummer, especially at that level. You would think that when you're at that level, you would feel pretty good about the missions that you're going on, because you're not going on bullshit missions. They don't send Delta or DevGru or any, these special mission units out on like just census patrols. This is, you guys are going out to do a specific job, or I don't know. It's just, that's a bummer to hear that you felt that even over there,
Yeah. And it's one of those things where, like, I could get into details. There's probably nothing good's going to come from that. Yeah. So, I just leave it where it is. But I felt like, once things kind of wrapped up with the thing that we were there to do initially, then I felt like we could be better utilized elsewhere and doing other things. We ended up kind of getting caught in, the military in general ended up basically getting caught in kind of the same thing as Vietnam, which is a war of attrition. So if you're just engaging guys after they get sent out of the hate factory, like, you're never gonna get ahead of it. Yeah. So how do you stop people from getting cranked out through the hate factories? Like, you got to cut off the funding to the hate factory. You've got to, do these other things, take out the key components to the hate factory and stuff like that. So that's why I say I just feel like it kind of got diluted and, got to the point where I'm like, I'm ready to go challenge myself in a different way and do something different. And, and that's all good. Like, there are people that still want to go do this. Cool. It's just not me.
Yeah. No, dude, I 100% get it. That's like I was saying before, I got out, I hit that 12-year mark, and it was like, I was getting ready, and I told him, I was like, look, man, if you guys send me on another ship deployment, I'm getting out. I was like, it's not worth my time. It's like being in prison. It's not worth saying goodbye to my kid, and it wasn't like I was going on a deployment and like all this cool stuff was happening. Because I was part of the, I became part of the actual MUSE staff, the Marine element, the command element staff. I was basically in the command center on ship, answering the phone. That was my job. I stood watch like once a week for 12 hours, and then that was really it. There's nothing to do on ship. And I felt so underutilized and so like this was a waste of my time. And the other thing too is that you just get treated like shit on ship. If you're an enlisted guy on a Navy ship, it's just not a good, unless you're a chief, you know, a Navy chief, everybody else gets shit on. It's just not a good place to be. And I told him, I'm like, look, man, this isn't worth it to me anymore. So if this is where you're going to send me, then I'm getting out. And that's where they sent me. And I was like, all right, man, I'm out. You have one life to live, you know, and I can't justify telling my kid goodbye so I can go answer a phone on a 12-hour watch once a week for fucking 7 months, you know? So everybody gets to that place, I think. And then you have to make that decision, you know, like, do I keep going? Because you look at it and it's like, well, you're 8 years from retirement. You know, you're 8 years from lifetime benefits and stuff like that. But then I was also like, well, how many more deployments could I get sent on in the next 8 years? You know, because I did 5 deployments, and my 5 deployments were from 2009 to 2016. I did 5 deployments in that time frame. 5 workups, 5, you know, and that's a lot. You know, that's a pretty busy cycle. And it was just like, so when people would be like, oh, it's only 8 more years and you can retire. And I'm like, bro, that's in my job as a JTAC where I got back from that last deployment and they wanted me to go on a ship a week later to go back out, you know, like that was the kind of, cause there's not enough JTACs out there.
Yeah. That turns into 56 months deployed, you know, if you're doing the same cycle of, you know, 7 months at a whack. And, I think for me, the luster wore off prior to, you know, even the deploy thing. And, you know, when I first got to the unit, it's kind of like going to work at Disney World. Where you're like, man, I am never leaving. This is the greatest place on earth. And I'm not saying it's not that. It's a cycle. Everything in the military is a cycle. So, okay, now we're doing this. Okay, here's this. Now we're doing that. Now it's time to pack our bags. Now it's, you know, very cyclical, very predictable. And I don't know. So after about 5 years, I was kind of like, all right, getting the itch for what can I do? I mean, I've kind of hit the pinnacle in terms of, you know, serving in the military. I briefly thought about becoming a physician's assistant. And I thought, you know, that might be something cool where it's like, I can go do this and then, you know, at least learn a skill that's going to be marketable outside of, you know, like regardless of what people think, like shooting people isn't really a marketable skill in the business world. So
it's crazy,
it doesn't
right?
matter. And nobody in the business world cares how many deployments you have.
Nope.
Or how many people you killed or anything else. So I briefly thought about that. I did some training with a government organization, and they offered me the job as like, you know, GS-14 head trainer type of thing. I thought about that, but then I looked at the area where I'd have to live and just the economy there, you know, sky high. So like even being a GS-14 probably wouldn't, I'd have to live 2 hours away and commute. And, you know, so it kind of got to a point where, all right, I'm not really having fun doing this. And I really want to challenge myself in a different way and do something different. So, you know, that happened before the monotony of just deploying.
Yeah. It's weird. Like when I was getting out, I was like, maybe I'll do reserves. You know, I considered doing the reserves for a little while because I was like, maybe I shouldn't just walk away from it. You know what I'm saying? And then I was like, you know what? If I do the reserves, I'm gonna just keep being mad about the stuff that I get mad about all the dumb stuff, you know, that you have to deal with being in the military. And then I also have because there's still wars going on, you know, in 2018, nothing had ended yet. I was like, there's also a real possibility that I could get recalled, you know, while I'm out here trying to go to college or something, do something else. So I was like, all right, clean break. No military, no government work, just go to school and figure it out and do something completely different, you know? And, again, that's not for everybody. Sometimes I'm like, I had multiple, it's weird. I've been out for a few years and I still occasionally get a call for a contract job offer. And I'm like, I'm gone, man. I'm too far out of it at this point. You know, I think it's, but it's like those things are tempting, you know, because there's pay there and there's like adventure and stuff, especially after you've been living in the real world and it starts to get kind of boring compared to all the stuff that we used to do. I see why people go and do it. And but yeah. Let's we're talking about getting out. We haven't even really gotten into all your other stuff. Let's back it up a little bit. You've been at the Rangers for a little while, and then you guys get the call to go to Mogadishu. Now, this, for people that don't know what was going on there, you know, warlords are fighting, UN sending in food and trying to like help the area out, try to stop the famine and all that stuff. But Adid and the other warlords are trying to use the food as like a weapon, basically stealing it and shit. They sent in the MEU, I believe, or maybe a larger contingent than the MEU, the Marine Expeditionary Unit. But there were like a bunch of Marines that went there initially, and I think they were there for a while, and then they pulled out, and then the Rangers went in, and then that's kind of where you come into play. What was it? What was it like when you got the word? Like, hey, we're going on a deployment, like a real deployment.
Well, we were in Fort Bliss, Texas, and participating in a joint readiness exercises, and nobody had heard anything about it. You know, nobody knew Somalia, it was, you know, where it was located or anything. And this is kind of the interesting thing is I'm starting to peel back the onion on a bunch of stuff. And I've got a project that I'm going to be releasing this year as it gets closer to the 30th anniversary of the Blackhawk Down moment. And anyway, but I found out a lot of things that none of us had any clue was actually happening back in the day. Like one of the other Ranger battalions was actually preparing to go do the mission. And I don't think anybody in my group or element that, you know, I was in had any idea that anybody was preparing for something. So here we are in Fort Bliss, Texas, and doing these training exercises. And one day the leadership is like, hey, you know, all the leaders come over here into the command tent. And, you know, basically the word was put out. There's, this aid that we're sending through the UN, and we've got Americans over there. And, you know, the warlords are fighting over the aid and trying to, you know, steal it and use it and sell it on the black market or have control over it for power. And, you know, the president is looking at utilizing a force to go in there and take out some of the key figures of the leadership. And, you know, we don't think anything's going to happen. It's not like anything's going to happen tomorrow, but, you know, just want to kind of give everybody a heads up. And I don't remember how long it was. We were there for maybe a week, or we were there for maybe 18 days total, you know, something like that. And anyway, within a day or two, it was kind of like, hey, this thing is getting more serious. Another American was killed. And so we're going to probably end up at Fort Bragg, and we'll do a train up. And then, you know, the president will make a decision whether he wants to utilize the task force to go, you know, start prosecuting this, or, you know, if it's going to wave off of it. So another day or two goes by, and we end up in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and, you know, go through about a 10-day training cycle, you know, and how we were going to do things when we were there. And at some point, you know, maybe 8 days in, 6 days in, I don't recall, you know, didn't keep a journal, unfortunately, but after about a week of train up, you know, it was kind of like, well, this is just an option. So we're going to head back to Texas and continue with the exercises. And so we got sent back to Texas. We landed in the airfield, and one of the admin guys came running out to the plane and said, don't get off the plane. You guys are going back. There was another American killed, and the president is given the go-ahead to do this. So they refueled the plane. We flew back to Fort Bragg. We did another, you know, couple of days. I think we got uniforms, like desert uniforms, and we got body armor and things like that. And within, I think, 3 days, we were on, you know, C5s headed over. And so that's kind of how the word came down. But, you know, we had been for years doing all of these anti-drug, you know, interdiction type of things. And, you know, Mogadishu, Africa, none of that was ever a part of any scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some chem bio stuff at different points in time, like, hey, there's a thing that might happen here. So we would, do some of that kind of stuff, but it just kind of came out of nowhere. And interestingly, I remember being a little kid and seeing something, I want to say on 60 Minutes, about Somalia and about Mogadishu. And, I was probably like 7 or 8 years old when I saw this, but it was just, about all these starving people over there.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of interesting because I was like, I know where that place is. I remember this this documentary or something that I saw when I was a little kid. And that was it. Next thing you know, 22nd of August, we're there and landed at the airfield.
Now, when you guys got there, what was there a rush to get into, like, start doing missions and stuff, or was there a couple days of acclimation, like figuring out what you're actually doing there? Because for those that don't know, like, the guys that got killed, they were attacking American convoys and vehicles with roadside bombs and stuff. I think there was like a couple military police, American military police that were killed, and then multiple injuries, like more than 10 or 12 injuries from different, like 3 or 4 different attacks, like you mentioned. And that's when they gave the go ahead to go in. When you guys arrived, though, did it feel like there was a set mission ready to go that you were getting ready for? Or was it like, all right, we're here, let's kind of figure things out and play it by ear?
It felt like, okay, we're here, let's get the lay of the land, and we'll figure out what's next when it comes. And I didn't feel like, oh, hey, we're getting ready to roll out the gate, so like, let's get prepared right away or anything like that. Just logistically speaking, we didn't even really have a secure compound at that point in time. So like, we had the hangar, and everybody's seen that in the movie and stuff like that, but there was a wall around one side of it, and it was kind of open and exposed on the other side. So one of the first things that happened was, once we got in, we got a briefing. They gave us some cards, and I've got a bunch of this stuff still. They gave us some cards that had different phrases that, you could practice, pointy, talky kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
Like back up, show me your hands, those kinds of things. We got like our IDs that, let us in and out of our area, specific area, so that, one of the first things that I did was, my squad leader was a team leader at the time. So the squad leader was like, hey, take one of the privates out and go to the hole in the wall over there and make sure nobody comes in. And it was like, very, okay, like, what does that mean? So I take a private out to the hole in the wall. And interestingly, there was a hole in the wall that on the other side, there were shower trailers, and there were Russians and like doctors and folks like that. There was kind of our chow area. So they had, pallets and pallets of MREs and, some tables that were built or in the process of being built where we could eat and things like that. And, so there I am standing there with a private, and, there are Russians approaching me and speaking in Russian. I'm pointing the gun at them like, hey, back up, like, I don't know who these people are.
Yeah.
But there was no real clear guidance of anything. Just don't let anybody in here. And so we're there for, I don't know, maybe an hour or so. And boom, this explosion hits about maybe 30, 45 feet from where we are. And a mortar round had hit one of the jock building where we had all our command and control and everything else, and hit the corner of that. And I think we had our weapons, no ammo, no helmets, no body armor, just, standing out at the hole in the wall with our weapons. So I get the private, me and him are up against the wall, and I get on the radio. I'm like, hey, somebody needs to run our body armor and helmets out here too. It's because we're getting mortar. A couple other mortars come floating in. And that was kind of like the welcome to Mogadishu moment.
That's not a good feeling right there, man. Having mortars drop in on that, especially that close, that's pretty sketchy for sure.
Yeah, it was, by luck, at least that time. And the other ones hit nowhere really close, but that first one, man, I think I don't really have any phobias or fears. Lightning like really bothers me, and I love lightning. I love thunderstorms and everything else. But the only thing I can think is that my fear of lightning now is based on mortars and RPGs. And
Yeah.
just because you don't hear them coming, there's no, all right, here's this thing. It just, you're there playing volleyball, boom, this thing goes off. Or, rockets even, you can hear those coming in. But yeah, just a very uncomfortable feeling.
Yeah, it's if you know it after that first one hits and there's more coming, then it's that really shitty moments of just waiting. There's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do in this moment but just wait and see where it hits. And that's the being an artillery guy, being a forward observer, that was like the one of the big, I guess, assets of having artillery is because it's a mind fuck for the enemy. If explosions start happening all around you, you don't know when it's going to end. You don't know where the next one's going to explode. It's just I don't know. It's a very devastating kind of thing to have. At the time, this is again early '90s. What kind of weapon were you carrying? Did any sights on it or anything like that? And what kind of body armor did you have?
So I had a M249 saw gun, and that was kind of by choice. And mission wise, I was kind of a freelancer. Like, I was on a vehicle. That was another thing that kind of happened that I don't think anybody in my platoon was super happy about. But during the whole train up in Bragg, we were on the helo package, and our platoon was an assault platoon. So if we were seizing an airfield, we were the jumpers, and the other platoons were the Jeep and bike platoons. So once we air landed, they would roll off the aircraft in Jeeps and bikes and go establish blocking positions and things like that. So at some point in time, after the train up, but before we arrived in Mogadishu, our company commander decided to switch that. So we show up in Mogadishu. Our drivers had never driven before. They had never driven under night vision at night. They had, no experience on the weapon systems that are on the vehicles. Like, this was not our mission.
Mm-hmm.
And we heard that it was because of a rift between our company commander and our platoon leader. Our platoon leader was a former enlisted guy who had been in Grenada and Panama as an enlisted guy. So he was a switched on cat. And the word was that, there was a rift there, and our company commander was trying to screw our platoon and put us onto, the vehicle package, and the vehicle package wouldn't see any action and didn't get to do the cool Hollywood mission and everything else. So morale was pretty low. And I don't mean in a way of like, oh man, it was more like, we're getting screwed here. And, not because of anything other than,
personal
there's a
politics.
rift.
Yeah.
So there was a pretty quick, all right, well, we got handed this shit sandwich, so let's get these guys out here and drive around a secure location where we can at least get them some training and get everybody on what we're going to do and how we're going to do it and all of that. And we did that for a few days. And then I think, so we got there 22nd of August. I think the first mission we did was somewhere around the 5th of September. So there was a little bit of time. Now, administratively, we were doing things. So our vehicles were going out into the city, going to the UN compound to take this leader to talk with, this leader and meet up with so-and-so. There was a lot of that kind of stuff going on. Water resupply, going to get supplies and food and MREs and, whatever it might be. We were doing things like that. So we were actively kind of going out into the city and doing stuff and at least driving around and seeing people. And I can't say that it was a friendly, kind of situation where you're driving around, but we certainly didn't feel, threatened in a manner that, the blood pressure would go up or going out the gate, and it's a little nerve wracking and you're getting a lot of really nasty looks, but it wasn't like, pot shots were happening, or, you know, things like that were even happening. It was kind of like, who are these people and what the hell are they doing here in my country?
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, so the first mission that we do, we roll out and we set up a blocking position, you know, outer kind of perimeter outside of the target area. And we had a stadium behind us, and not the stadium that we ended up consolidating in after the Blackhawk Down battle, but it was a different stadium that ID used to use as like a propaganda speech, you know, kind of thing. And exfil was happening. Everybody was pulling off target. And all of a sudden behind us, you know, from the stadium, just the world turns red. And I think they opened up with, I think there were 12 guys that had gotten behind us and, you know, opened fire on us. And they were sticking their weapons through these kind of serrated cinder block walls. So they could put their gun barrel through, but they couldn't really traverse the gun barrel too much.
Mm-hmm.
At any, there may have been an RPG or two fired, and then just immediately this, you know, insane barrage of fire. I was at that point, like, literally standing in the middle of the street, maybe 30 feet away from where this stuff happens. And finally, you know, everybody swings around and opens fire on this, you know, where the gunfire was coming from. And finally, you give a ceasefire, and the first thing I could do is just like pat down my legs and arms and look at my hands and see there's blood on it, because I couldn't believe that much shit was flying through the air and like I wasn't hit. And I'm like, all right, let me go check on the privates and everybody else, and, you know, make sure we're good. And everybody was okay. And miraculously, there was one guy who had a kind of through and through on his lower thigh, and, you know, literally didn't even take him out of duty. You know, not a graze, but super, you know, superficial wound. And there was a guy that got hit in the K-pot. There were antennas that were shot off vehicles and stuff like that. So they had hit stuff, but just fortunately, you know, nobody got hit. And anyway, so we get back to the hangar, and all of a sudden, you know, the guys that had been shit talking us in other platoons about, oh, you guys got the, you know, the stupid vehicle mission and, you know, that kind of thing. They're like, these guys, you're not the G platoon, like we are. We should be doing that mission, you know, because we got to mix it up first. So yeah. All of a sudden there was this big competition to like try and get the mission back. So
that's funny.
Anyway, that was kind of the first foray into, you know, doing operational stuff.
Was this your first time out of the country? Out of the U.S.?
Probably so. Yeah.
What was it like to land in this third world country? I mean, people that have never been in a place like that can't really fathom, you know, the level of poverty, just the environment, right? What was it like for you as a young man, first time out of the country, rolling up into a place like this? It's completely alien to what you grew up with, I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't think that anybody can really, unless you've been there, I don't think that you can appreciate how like wild, wild west it is. And, you know, I think Americans in general have a pretty naive view of the world, just because we tend to view it from a place. We have luxury problems here, you know, and not that there aren't bad things that happen in the United States and things like that, but as compared to the stuff that I saw over there, I've never seen anything like that, and never saw anything like that even in Iraq and Afghanistan and any other third world place that I've been, and never saw anything like that. One of the first things I saw rolling out the gate, you know, like, hey, the ice cream machine's broken. Let's go take it to this other base and get it fixed. Or I'm making pretend here, but you know, some administrative thing that we did, and rolling down the road, and like this chick just like pulls her dress up and takes a shit right there on the sidewalk, you know, and you're just like, wow, okay, that happened. You know, it just, we were way down the beach at a range one day, and this was probably before, I don't know where it was in the whole grand scheme of things. It was before October 3rd, but we're shooting we put these 55-gallon drums out, and we're shooting everything out of, law rockets and 50 cals and Mark 19s and 240s and saw gun, pistols, all kinds of stuff. We're just having a field day shooting. And all of a sudden somebody's like, hey, cease fire. And you can see way out in the dunes, in the direction that we're shooting, it's like this little figure coming up over the dunes. Like, dude is walking into the range. And so ceasefire is called, and we sit there and wait probably 45 minutes for this guy to make the distance all the way across these dunes. And he gets there and he's like, oh, you owe me money because you killed one of my camels, And I don't know what happened from that, but at some point in time, little kids show up and we're giving them our brass, and they were just, going crazy over our brass. We gave the littlest kid in the group, somebody gave him an MRE. And instantly, like, the next biggest kid hit the kid, took the MRE and started running with it. And then it was like the next biggest kid hit the kid, took the MRE, and it just kind of like made its way up the chain until the biggest kid had the MRE. And we were like, oh man, like, this is just not, I don't know.
It's the survival of the fittest,
Yeah.
One MRE could probably feed a few of those people. That's like a huge deal. It's hard for people that have never been into like a really shithole kind of country to understand. You can't just go out and hand out bottles of water, because then suddenly you have this mob around you. That's things like handing out food and water are like deliberate operations that have to be planned, that have to be like security set up and stuff like that, because it's overwhelming. These people are in the worst conditions, poverty conditions, are starving. It's like one of the hottest places in the world. So they have, they're thirsty, they're dehydrated, and it's life and death. Like, some of this stuff can be life and death for them. So it's just a weird vibe, and it's like, I try to touch on it when I talk to someone like yourself that's been there and seen that kind of stuff, to try to convey, because people just don't understand, man. And they don't really, I'm a very relaxed person, post-military. And I think a lot of it is because I've seen how shitty things can be and how shitty things are in other places. And I'm like, man, I can turn my lights off and on today. I can turn my tap water on and get a glass of water, like, I don't know. It's just such a stark contrast to what other people in other countries are dealing with day to day. So I kind of wanted to set that tone a little bit and get your take on, just the vibe of the city and everything. How were you guys feeling before October 3rd? I guess I had Tom Satterley come on. He was a Delta guy. He was there October 3rd, and he was talking about, like, we didn't know. It wasn't, after the fact. Obviously, that's a date, that's a infamous date, I guess, or it was like a huge operation, and we talk about it and stuff. But before October 3rd, that was just another day and another one of the ops, just a, part of the schedule, part of the operation schedule. He was like, yeah, we were just out. He said he was out on a 5-mile run and, got the page like, hey, this op's going on. So he's like, oh yeah. So we just ran back. I grabbed a bottle of water, grabbed my gun. Like, where's my position at the target area? Right there. Okay, cool. Get on the helicopter and go. He's like, it was really almost that basic, where I'm flying into this knowing my corner of, the target area that I'm supposed to be at. And then everything else is whatever, that's being handled by other people, which made me kind of think it was like, wow, the planning feels very lackadaisical, very not thorough, I guess. Was your experience the same, or did you feel like there was more mission prep and planning that went into your end? Because you were there with the Rangers, he was there with Delta.
Yeah. I think just generally speaking, those guys got a lot more information than we got. And maybe not about a specific target or anything along those lines, but just in general, situational awareness kind of stuff. A lot of the stuff for me it had probably been filtered. Our platoon sergeants and platoon leaders are sitting in meetings and they're hearing intel updates, and they're probably filtering out and distilling the stuff that's pertinent to us. But
for sure.
I got the general sense, the one thing I felt like was everything that we did, and I think we did 7 or 8 missions total while we were there. I think every mission, I felt the tension kind of rising. And it's almost like, All right, then we go out and we do this daylight thing, and the crowds were out of control to the point of bringing in helos, and they're throwing rubber grenades at the crowd and trying to dust them off. And we're in the middle of all this, surrounded by thousands and thousands of people. And, then a couple of shots go off, and then you hear the thump of, an RPG getting fired. And, there was just things like that where I felt like it was escalating in a way that I could have never predicted the battle to have been as big and violent as what it was. But I definitely felt the tension every time we went out was just kind of getting a little bit more tense.
Mm-hmm.
And, it wasn't fun. It wasn't, like we're going out and just, joking around and having fun on this. It was head on a swivel. Like, this is not a good place to be. And I don't know, I could feel the tension. The movie, and this is one of the things of the project that I'm going to be releasing later this year, really kind of gets into, it's not a true Hollywood story behind the scenes of Blackhawk Down. It's really talking about the aftermath of things that happened. But one of the things that I find very interesting is that most people have seen the movie, in the community, people that serve in the military. A lot of people have seen the movie, or they saw it when they were a younger kid, and in a lot of cases, it inspired them to join.
For sure, yeah.
Pre-GWAT. The movie is basically fact, right? Because it's a movie, and it happened in the movie, so therefore it's real, and everything. The whole scene where it's like, hey, we're going into a really bad area of the city, and make sure your guys are, switched on and everything else, like that never happened. To Tom's point, it was very much, the opposite. Hey, we're going out, we're doing this. The target building should be behind us. We're going to an intersection that's shaped like this. This vehicle's going here. This vehicle's going here. And kind of that was it. And to the point that I didn't understand, like we were being engaged far before we got to the target area. And when I dismounted for the first time, I thought we were at the target building. I thought we were where we were supposed to be. And we got out and everybody kind of dismounted and started engaging people, and immediately went from 0 to 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
And, so next thing I know, I see a vehicle get hit, and it been hit by an RPG, and I see some guys kind of get thrown through the air. And at the same time that's happening, I don't really realize that the snap of the bullet is the snap of the bullet. I was kind of like, what the hell is that? Are they shooting like 22s? And my buddy Don Pillow, who was killed just a little bit after this, I yelled at him, what are they shooting at? It's 22s. And I see pieces of sidewalk near me and kind of like turn into dust and pulverizing. And I thought, oh, those are incoming bullets. So that happens, and my vehicle takes off down the street. And I'm like, I got to catch back up with my vehicle, and probably moved a couple hundred yards down the street by myself to link back up with the vehicle. And I don't think that it was like not a paralyzing fear. And I'm sure you've been in gunfights, so you can kind of understand this. It wasn't like paralyzing, like I can't move. It was just like such sensory overload that whatever I was doing was just automatic. Whether it was firing my gun, like I don't remember consciously making a decision to shoot at something. It was just happening, and almost as if I'm not in my body, and it's like I'm controlling the levers from above, making my body do stuff. And anyway, so we finally end up at the target building, and then very quickly move from there to where Blackburn had fallen from the fast rope. And right at that kind of scene, Matt Eversman, Casey Joyce, and he got killed right there in the middle of the street while we were trying to kind of secure Blackburn and get him loaded up and everything else. So that was, anyway, I don't know what took me down that line, but it went from 0 to 1,000 very quickly. And I didn't No, nor was there any mechanism to get and give information.
Yeah.
And so when I look back and I say, what are things that we could have done differently? It's very much, I try and explain it like we didn't have Peltors. We didn't have earplugs. It was literally deafening to the point where you could see people's mouths moving, not hear any words, catch a syllable here or there type of thing. And we had no plan for, okay, if this happens, what do we do? Do we sit in the middle of the street, returning fire? Do we jump over a wall and kind of let's secure a piece of this real estate and fight and defend it? How do we put out information? Like, obviously, the leaders can't gather up in the middle of the street to disseminate information and then that get disseminated to everybody else. So my entire day until later that evening, like maybe when we went back out for the third time, I had no idea what I was doing from one point to the next to the next. It was literally just this giant chaotic scene. And with a couple of moments of, okay, you can let your guard down for a second. But it was basically just nothing but chaos. Had zero idea what was going on other than the things that I saw. And just no information flow.
It's crazy because nowadays, I mean, it's easy to look back at that and go, what? They didn't know anything. They didn't have TTPs, SOPs, and, these different things set up for different scenarios. But it was such a different time. It was such a different time. It was pre-GWAT, obviously. It was peacetime military, kind of time frame. And technology wasn't like it is now. Where everybody's got tablets and electronic maps and, like all the different imagery, any kind of imagery you want, is basically available during the Global War on Terror. Not the case then, and everybody can have maps almost nowadays, but back then, not the case. So you were just existing in a moment, surviving, kind of, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, that's kind of ultimately what it turned into was just, I'm here just trying to get out of here alive. And doing whatever I have to do, to stay alive and keep my teammates alive and, make sure that we, do the right thing.
Yeah.
It was, it's not until after the fact, and I think being in other gunfights and doing other stuff, that's where it kind of opened my eyes to like how ill prepared we actually were. I think we were as prepared as we could be at the time. But I'll use this example as well. When we got back, I went to the E5 board, and one of the questions that they asked were, if you're on the battlefield and there's a female that's coming out and pointing out your location to enemy combatants, can you kill her? And I was like, I don't know. And they asked me, well, would you have done, shot this person in Mogadishu? And it was kind of like, I don't know what the right answer is. Law of the land warfare existed back then. There are military manuals that tell you what you can and can't do. Mm-hmm. No leader ever taught me that. Yeah. It wasn't like so we can say we were as prepared as we think we could have been, but we weren't. And there was an ROE, and I think everybody kind of looked at it like, oh, the ROE says if a guy has this and he's doing this and you kind of escalate it, then you're allowed to shoot. Like, okay, well, what do you do when a little, 12-year-old kid sticks an AK out the door and starts shooting and, then you don't see the kid anymore, but the gunfire is coming out the window. And then, you know what I mean? It's just this very ambiguous thing. I always like to talk about the people with the whole, I got so many confirmed kills kind of thing. And like, show me the confirmation committee that follows people around on the battlefield and says, oh yeah, that's okay, that's 6. Okay, there's 8.
Got a little do with like a little counter, like click.
Yeah. But in my time, other than later during the GWAT, where it's like, okay, we're in the same room as a person and we see them die. Like everything on the battlefield is ambiguous. You know, you shoot, somebody's shooting at you through a door, you shoot the door. Like, I don't know if they die. I don't know if I hit them or not, you know. Throw a grenade in the window, maybe it hit them. I don't know. Is the person dead, alive? Like, so anyway, I always point that out whenever I talk about this stuff, because I feel like anybody that's claiming the whole confirmed kill thing is, I don't know. I don't know what that's all about.
Yeah, for sure. No, I know what you're saying. You're not gonna, especially if you're like assaulting something, you're not gonna stop to count bodies, you know, or like, yeah. What was it like for you?
Yeah. You take a pause real quick, man?
Yeah, for sure. You're all good now?
Yeah, man.
Okay, cool, man. So yeah, I guess my question was going to be, what was it like when the first American got killed that you knew about? How did that change things for you?
So, you know, initially it was just terrifying, and, you know, kind of like unpacking a lot in a very short amount of time. So, you know, I didn't recognize that these are bullets that are cracking. And, you know, it took a few seconds to kind of piece that together. And it was still, once that happened, it was still kind of, it started to become less terrifying. And now it's more about, okay, now I see people and I need to start engaging them. And I start to do that. And it wasn't until the Blackburn crash site when we started loading up, you know, casualties, and then Casey Joyce is hit and killed. And as we start to exfil them back to the hangar, then that's when everything goes sideways. And, you know, so we had 2 or I think 3 vehicles total, just basically driving blind through the city, trying to get back to the hangar. And, you know, we're set up every step of the way, you know, so we make a left turn and there's burning tires and burning vehicles and stuff in the middle of the road. We're trying to get turned around and we're getting engaged. And, you know, it's just like literally one ambush after the other. And there were people that got hurt and killed during that. And once I saw my buddy Dom get killed, I mean, it happened right in front of me. That was when everything kind of changed, and the switch got flipped. And, you know, it was all about bringing the hate after that. And, you know, kind of made the decision, not committing murder, you know, obviously, but, you know, anybody that I can kill that is doing something nefarious and, you know, going to be threatening me or the team of people that I'm with, like, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that they don't get a round off first. And, you know, it basically was like that until the next day.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine. I imagine the first time, you know, you're saying your friend got killed right in front of you. I mean, that's obviously a hardcore moment in life, right? You know, like I think I remember that part in the movie, and they made it out. It was pretty graphic. I think he was like the gunner or something. Was that the case? He was shot in the turret. Pilla, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, he was in the back of the Humvee.
Okay. Man, yeah, I'm lucky where on all the deployments I went on, none of the guys I was with were killed, like around me or anything like that. I mean, guys got killed, but yeah, it was I can't imagine that, you know, and I imagine that made everything super real. You know, because before something like that happens, there's like a perspective that you have. And you probably still have this almost like superhero feeling to it, right? Like, we're the Americans, we're Rangers, you know, like no one can stop us. And you've stood in the road and been shot at and no one hit you, you know, like, I'm invincible. And that kind of busts that mystique real quick, right?
Yeah, it's also, you know, like I said, every time I'm asked about Mogadishu stuff, that's one of the things I try and do is put it in framework of, this is a peacetime military. There is no war. There is no even prospect of going to war. Mm-hmm. It's, you know, maybe if you're lucky, you get to go do a deployment. Like during Desert Storm, I think 1st Ranger Battalion jumped onto an airfield, you know, middle of day, show of force type of thing. Not even, not a shot fired. I think they blew up a radio tower, and that was it. Back on the plains. And,
Yeah.
and it's like, wow, that was the big, claim to fame from those guys. And I'm not taking away what they did, because who knows what could have happened.
For sure. Yeah.
They were there and they were ready to go do it. So I don't take anything away from them. But it literally was just such a different time, and that I don't think anybody thought that they would be in the middle of that situation as that situation was unfolding. Yeah. And it's almost like, and then there are a lot of people that are super bitter about, the task force was capped, and politically speaking, we didn't have some of the tools that we would rely on normally to be able to kind of mitigate some of that stuff. Now, there are people that are very angry at President Clinton for that. And my argument to them would be, this was intended to be a very clandestine. It was not advertised. It wasn't all over the media. We kind of snuck over there. We were out doing stuff. And the last thing we need is, an AC-130 overhead flying around and fast movers and everything. Like, we're not invading a country. Mm-hmm. We're not. This isn't an act of war. So if he wanted to be careful about the American presence that was there, I guess if we didn't have those things, that we would normally use to help us out of a jam, the other option is we could have just not gone at all. And, I don't think that was an option either. So, yeah, our hands were tied to some degree. If we had an AC-130 on station, and we had some of the other things that maybe we would have used, if we had that at our disposal, the battle, I'm sure, would have turned out differently, but you work within constraints. Everything you do in the military, there's constraints. It's not like blue sky. Oh yeah, we need $10 billion to do this train up, and we need to have a space shuttle that, and you know what I mean? It's like, It's all constraints. And so we went and we did an operation, and there were constraints that, definitely affected the course of the battle. But, we were out there to do it. So
for sure,
I don't hold a grudge politically in that regard. I don't feel like, that directly resulted in. There are a lot of other things at our own level that we failed to do that had just as great of an impact, such as guys not knowing, when the woman comes out in the street and starts pointing out your location, and dudes start firing RPGs at you, and you don't shoot her because you don't know if that's legal or not to do, that's as badly constrained as having something overhead, Yeah. So you can't, it's like beggars can't be choosers,
Yeah, for sure. Before we stop for a second, you were mentioning you guys were in the Humvees heading back to base, trying to take Blackburn and the other casualties back to the base. For people that don't know and haven't listened to the Tom Satterley interview, we talked, within 10 minutes of the raid beginning, Adid had called up his militia. They had a really good, very communication system, basically cell phone calls to the different people, and got the word out for them to converge on you guys. So within a matter of 10 to 20 minutes, there were thousands of people heading to that area, to be the ambushers, be the blocking force, be whatever. And that's what you guys were fighting through. So it's hard for us to imagine, because you think, oh, where they're driving down the streets and stuff. It's not like driving down the streets here. You guys were fighting through crowds and stuff, and having to deal with just an insane amount. I mean, what you said before about sensory overload, I don't know how it could have gotten more stressful than the kind of situation you were in,
Yeah.
When you guys were heading back, though, and you're fighting through these different ambushes and stuff, how long did it take you to get back to the camp? And then did you know a helicopter had gone down, or did you find that out once you guys got back to the camp?
I don't think that had happened just yet.
Okay.
I want to say that it took us the better part of 30 or 45 minutes to get back. And that could be wildly wrong. But it felt like a very long time, compared to how close we started getting engaged for rolling out to the target area. So, I want to say that it was like a 30, 45 minute thing. And I can honestly say that I pretty much didn't stop firing that entire, drive back. It's interesting too, because the movie, which is, kind of fact in everybody's mind, guys didn't have enough ammo. Guys didn't bring their night vision. Guys didn't, et cetera, didn't have water. I was in a rolling ASP,
okay.
5-point, like I could put as much stuff as I wanted in that vehicle. And, there was no shortage of ammo for me. Had plenty of drinks, had all the stuff that I needed. If we hadn't gone back to the hangar, I couldn't have grabbed more ammo, so that at some point I would have run dry.
Yeah.
Or would have had to have, conserved. But for me, there was no shortage. I was able to stay on the gun pretty much that entire time, as needed until we got back to the hangar. We got back to the hangar, and not necessarily my finest moment, but I kind of lost my shit in a way that was probably more out of frustration than anything else. And I remember throwing my stuff down, and there was a whole crew of vehicles that hadn't been out on the initial target. They were in the middle of doing like a water resupply run when we went out and launched on the target. And so that 2 or 3 or 4 vehicles worth of guys were all kind of standing around watching us, limp these vehicles back in the gate. And, there's dead guys in there, and there's guys that have been hit. And, so I got people coming up and, trying to hug me and calm me down. I was just kicking stuff and swearing up, one side up and down and everything else. And the vehicle with the casualties in it went around to the back of the hangar, and they were cleaning everything up. And about that time was, oh, hey, there's been a helicopter shot down. And when I heard that, I didn't recognize, because of the chaos, because of there not being any way to communicate, I had no idea that like the rest of the force wasn't right behind us. I didn't know that, oh, they're still out there doing the thing. I was under the impression that we were exfilling from the target. We just so happened to go grab these guys that needed to get exfilled, and we were heading back and kind of leading the charge, trying to figure out the best route or whatever. Like that was just my assumption. So, the word comes down like, hey, we're going back out there. And again, out of frustration of being in a position where like we're basically signing up to everybody's going to die here. Like there's no way we're going to be able to go do this and survive. It's too violent. We have no armor. And with the amount of stuff that's flying around, like we're just kind of, this is a suicide mission at this point. So I can't say that I was super thrilled to go carry that out, but ended up, we all got back in the vehicles and we rolled out and did it again.
It had to have, I get it. I mean, for you to come back and think, wow, can't believe we made it through that. That was crazy. We got dead people here now, like horrible. And then for someone to come out and be like, hey, we're heading back out after all of that, it had to have been just crazy, like an absolute mind fuck, and I can't, I'm not, who can fault you for being in the mindset that you were when you're talking about your friend getting killed in front of you, shooting all around you, basically shooting constantly on your way back because of all the fighting and stuff like that. That's a lot. That's a lot for anybody to take in, especially someone that this is their first kind of real in-depth combat engagement. You're not, acclimated to it, I guess. I'm sure over the years you kind of figured out ways to deal with different things, or you understand why things are the way they are. But at this point, you're still pretty green.
Well, it also wasn't like, it wasn't clean, you know,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you know, it's not like, hey, there's a compound of bad guys, and I'm not trying to say one has, you know, more meaning than another, but it's not like, all right, we've got a support by fire position set up, and we're going to go ahead and start bounding forward until we take fire, and then we're going to, you know, open up our support position, and somebody could get hit in the middle of that and things, but we're trying to see cover. There was no plan to that. It was just literally flying by the seat of your pants. And even going back out, like, what's the plan?
Yeah.
There is a plan. We're going to go drive around looking for the crash site. That's the plan. So then it's shown in the movie, but there's the whole relay problem between the command and control bird that's up telling the lead vehicle where to turn left, and no, you're going to make it right at your next intersection. And it's like, well, we blew past that. Now, hey, ambush time again. And, you know, next thing you know. And so at some point, we linked back up with another portion of the vehicle package that was out in the street. And they had been pinned down to the point where I watched, you know, guys throw thermite grenades onto a couple of the vehicles to destroy them in place. And now we're starting to cross-load people, and there's more casualties, and there's more KIA and things like that. And so we're trying to load that up. And in the middle of stuff like that, you know, I'm engaging people. I'm watching our company XO go grab a fast rope out of the street, you know, because he signed for it. And, you know, it's just like all kinds of chaos going on. So,
can you imagine getting a charge sheet for like surviving through all that, and you get home and they're like, hey, did you bring back the fast rope? No.
Yeah, that's $1,200 statement of charges, you know.
I'd be like, go fuck yourself, bro.
Yeah.
That's crazy,
so,
man.
You know, there's that stuff going on. You know, when we started heading back out, the company XO jumped in the vehicle with us, and, you know, he was like, all right, guys, let's make sure we're doing the right thing, and, you know, just shooting people with weapons and nobody else, and blah, 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 blah. And we're like, cool, man. And we literally get to, like, out the gate, we get to a circle. It was called K4 Circle, which is not even maybe a kilometer from the front gate, I think. And we're already starting to get engaged. And it was like, yeah, just all out the window.
Yeah. Was he out there before, or was he with the group that was doing the water resupply, and this is his first time out?
He wasn't out on the original target. So he was able to kind of, you know, hey, try and rein everybody in and make sure nobody's doing anything that they shouldn't be doing. And he was doing the right thing. I'm not going to fault him. But once we got stopped, where we linked up with the rest of the guys, he's the dude that jumped out and grabbed the fast ropes and make sure it had that. I ended up with one of the guys' helmets that had been killed, and I remember just securing it. You know, you're trying to like police everything up that you can, and remember looking at the inside of his helmet, which had, you know, blood and stuff all over it, and there's a picture of his wife that he had up in the dome of the helmet. And it's just like those kinds of moments, like you can't even absorb that while you're in the middle of everything, you know. But those are just like these little surreal blips of stuff that I remember. I remember probably one of the coolest things that I've ever seen in combat, and, you know, was there on the street, and everybody's engaged in just kind of, I'm looking around, and I got nobody in front of me. And one of the Blackhawks came over and was real low. And the guys in the 160th, a lot of the crew chiefs, you may remember this, you may be able to like Google it and find the image of it. But popular at the time were these shirts and stickers, and it was no fear.
Oh yeah.
And they had on the side of their flight helmets these red, white, and blue no fear skulls. And dude was so close that I could see his no fear skull, and just shellacking dudes with a minigun, and just see Kilo come over, and like this is on the other side, like there's a row of buildings, and this is, he's hitting stuff on the other side of these buildings that we can't see,
Mm-hmm.
and he's just cutting loose on this minigun. And, to this day, that's just like one of the most epic things I've ever seen.
That's probably a good feeling too on the ground. You're like, oh, like that support, that knowing that they're taking care of some stuff that I can't see that may be ahead of us, that's a good feeling. Like, I don't know. And then obviously when helicopters get shot down, that makes it not as a good feeling. It's like a whole, when you said you went back out multiple times, did you spend the night in the city, or what was your kind of role through the rest of the fight?
So we linked back up there, and I don't know how long that engagement was. We ended up back at the hangar again, and just kind of kept doing the same thing. Like we would just cross load. Like, all right, we lost some vehicles, so now the guys that were on that vehicle are on this vehicle. Okay, get more ammo, get more water, get more everything, and let's get back on. We ended up at the Newport area. Which was, and I don't remember driving there. I don't remember how we got there. Totally a blur. But we ended up over there, and that's where we linked up with the Malaysians and the Pakistanis to put together the column that rolled out, probably at like 10 o'clock at night. So at the point where we ended up back at the hangar the second time was probably close to like 6 in the evening, something like that, 6:30, maybe. I don't know. That could be wrong. And I'm not a person that, like, I've watched the movie, I've seen the movie, but like I haven't read the book. I don't need to read the book. I don't want to read the book. I don't, it just is what it is. So I think the book did a good job not so much the movie, but I think the book did a really good job of laying out the timeline of events, and so that's probably the best resource for, when all that stuff actually happened and everything else. But at some point, we ended up at the Newport area. We've got a column of vehicles along with the Pakistanis and the Malaysians that are going to, provide some armor so that we can exfil everybody in the armor vehicles, whenever we can, and return to base.
After this convoy had come in and you guys have extracted everybody, the pilots had been recovered, the bodies had been recovered from the ones that had been killed. What was kind of like how was everybody dealing with it? Once everybody got back to the, obviously when it was immediately over, there was still one guy missing. There was still one guy in the city, right?
There were multiple guys. There were multiple guys missing. So we didn't even know that, like, there's a lot to unpack in that question. So we were sitting right by the crash site and basically waiting for one of the people to get extricated from the helo. And that ended up, every 15 minutes on the radio, there was like a status update, and there was a pretty decent lull in the gunfire and everything else. There was still sporadic stuff, but the heat of the battle was for all intents and purposes over. And we were just, kind of doing the recovery thing. It's getting closer to sunrise, and we're kind of like, all right, let's get going here. Like, we need to get going before we lose the cover of darkness and don't have the ability to do things that we can do in the dark. And, still no word on the extrication. That's still happening, everything else. And I remember us, at that point, I think obviously the adrenaline had worn off, but also too, just like there was no fear at that point. It was, I basically, going out the second time, it kind of resigned that, all right, I'm going to die. And at least, I'm going to die trying. And I hope that if I get shot, that I can look up at, it was like a beautiful blue sky day. And I kind of resigned the fact that, like, if I get shot, I hope that I can just like look at the sky before I, am totally gone. And that might be like a way of just having a little bit of peace. And so anyway,
that's so crazy, dude. I gotta jump. I mean, I know what you're saying, but it's just like, the fact that that's what's going through your mind, you know what I'm saying? It's the weird shit where you think you're about to go into something crazy, and the stuff that you think about like that, like, I hope I can take a look at the beautiful sky one more time before I'm fully dead. You know, that's just, again, unless people have been in a situation like that, it's kind of hard to understand what you're really talking about there. You know what I'm saying? Like the feelings going through.
Yeah, I guess just trying to find some comfort. And, I felt like got body armor on. If I get shot in the head, like it's going to be over instantly. If I get shot in the body, as long as it's straight on, like I've got a plate that'll stop it. If I get shot in the arm or the leg, chances are, like, I may lose it, but I'll live. And so my two biggest fears were getting shot in the neck and shot in the groin. And I was just like, man,
don't blow my dick off.
Where but there, like, and like, let me. But that was, I guess, the only way of just kind of like soothing myself and saying, okay, if this happens, then maybe here's the plus side is, something positive that I can take away. Anyway, so the sun comes up, and now everything starts heating back up, and there is more sporadic fire, and now it's starting to kind of get directed towards us. And I remember seeing a cobra, a marine cobra, coming down the street, like right down the middle of the street, and dude just firing his gun the whole way as he came over us, and thinking, all right, well, it's going to be game on again here pretty soon. And at that point, it was interesting because like the fear was really gone, and it was more like, all right, I got a guy here. And me and another buddy who ended up flying 160th later in his career, he did like some crazy, like 19 deployments, got shot down 3 times, like dude's been everywhere, done it. He and I ended up in the Ranger Recon team together after Mogadishu. But anyway, we kind of sat back to back and just, took turns exchanging gunfire at dudes. And there were times when it was like, hey, check this out, and there's a group of guys doing something nefarious, and, launches a 40 millimeter round at them and watch them blow up. And, it was just stuff like that was going on. It was almost surreal.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we end up, fighting our way out. I don't think nobody knew that there were people that weren't in armored vehicles, or like, I didn't even know the Mogadishu Mile thing. I thought when I saw Blackhawk Down, the movie, I got invited to the premiere. And when I saw the movie, I thought it was something that Hollywood invented. I didn't even know that was something that happened for real.
That's crazy.
No knowledge of that. Anyway, we end up in the stadium, and kind of a consolidation point, and it was there where it was like, oh, where's so and so? Oh, he got killed. Oh, and other dudes are laid out on the stretcher, and this guy's got shrapnel in his butt cheeks, and he's laying there on a stretcher with his butt exposed. And it was kind of like a reunion, in the weirdest of ways. And then there were stacks of casualties and people that didn't make it, and seeing them kind of get loaded up, and some of their teammates saying goodbye to them and things like that. It was a super surreal moment. So the helicopters take off, and they're gone, and everybody's exfilled. Now we got to drive our vehicles back to the hangar, and that was at about, I don't know, maybe 10 or 11 in the morning, something
Mm-hmm.
like that. So we chose a route that was, as safe as we could make it, but we still ended up having to drive back to the hangar. So we get back to the hangar, and this was the craziest part of all, is like, nobody knew that there were people unaccounted for. We get back to the hangar, and in the very back corner of the hangar, there was a TV, and everybody's taking their gear off and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, everybody goes running to the corner of the hangar. And we get over there, and there's a crowd around the TV, and we're watching one of the helicopter crew get drugged through the streets. and had no clue. Like, I don't think anybody knew that there were people that weren't accounted for. Like, we hadn't even been able to kind of account for everybody at that point. Just kind of getting back and reconsolidating and everything. So that was a huge eye opener. There were people that were literally putting their gear back on, like, all right, let's load up and go look for these dudes. And at some point, within an hour or two, the word got put out that I think his name was Robert Oakley, but he was like the U.S. envoy to Somalia, or ambassador, someone like that, was headed that way, and he was going to negotiate for, the return of anybody that was missing and things along those lines. So there would be a 24-hour no missions, happening kind of situation. So we basically sat for 24 hours not doing anything while he negotiated for the return of all the casualties that hadn't been accounted for.
Yeah, that's was there animosity, like seeing that on TV and then being told that we can't do anything about it right now? We're going to let the diplomats take care of it?
Well, I mean, where do you start, right? Like, it's not like this is some tiny little, city.
Yeah.
It's a pretty large city, like, where we're just going to start driving around block to block with, 6 or 8 still functional vehicles. How are we going to even go about doing it? There was really no way for us to go do anything. Also at that point, reinforcements were headed over. So we had another company from the Rangers that was headed that way, and other folks to replace, those that had been lost and everything else. So those guys arrived on the 6th of October. And about that time, the only person that hadn't been recovered was Mike Durant. And he was the second part of the equation where, okay, we see this guy getting drugged around through the streets. And then, not too much longer after that, I don't remember if it was a day, if it was 2 days, but, at some point in time, Mike Durant shows up on CNN. And that's when everything kind of switched. So we went into full up, okay, training. We're going to go rescue this guy and put together a plan on how we were going to do it. And we started rehearsing it. So we went down to a secure facility at the beach, miles down the beach, and practiced and rehearsed and everything else. And I really wish that we'd gotten to do that, because I think it would have put a stamp on something that we didn't really get to finish.
Mm-hmm.
And for most of the guys that served in the Rangers, that was it. If they were peers of mine, they had about a year left in the Army, and then they were getting out. And, or some of the younger dudes, I guess, would still had a couple of years in the Army, but that was kind of it, and a lot of people left and separated from the service with just this kind of bad taste in their mouth, and we never really got to finish what we started. But he did end up getting, secured at some point, and, got him loaded onto the plane and sent home, and that was it. So we were just kind of at that point waiting on, what are we doing?
Mm-hmm.
Are we carrying on the mission? Are we not? Are we getting sent home? What's the deal? And I don't remember how that word came down or what we were really doing. We did some range stuff and we did some things like that, but really it was just kind of waiting on the word. And then I think about the 20th, 24th of October, somewhere around there, and we got on the planes and went home.
When you guys went home, I guess we can kind of wrap it up after this, but when you guys went home, you said some people got out not long after and they had a bad taste in their mouth. How did you feel about the whole situation? Because you obviously stayed in and went on to do other things. What were you feeling in the days, weeks, kind of months after about serving in the military, maybe Army leadership? Did it make you change your mind on what you perceived to be a reality within chain of command and stuff like that to what actually it is? I mean, how are you feeling?
Well, interesting. One of the things that happened was, hard to put this in perspective for people to understand it, other than it was just a different military and it wasn't a time of war. And that's just an oversimplification and generalization. But the reality was, we got back from that, and of the entire Ranger Regiment, of the entire infantry, with the exception of 10th Mountain, the group that was there in Mogadishu also, you had basically a company of dudes that experienced this combat thing, and nobody in the leadership positions wanted to hear about how we needed to change all of the things that we were doing to, it was very much like, okay, yeah, cowboys, like, now let's get back to what's important, make sure your boots are squared away and your uniform's pressed and everything else. So that turned a lot of people off.
Yeah.
I think for me, really what it did was, so I had, not to sidebar too long, I was supposed to go to the Ranger Recon Detachment selection in October of '93. So I had told my chain of command earlier in the summer, before, the deployment to Fort Bliss, that, hey, I'm going to go to selection for this specialized unit within the Rangers. So they were like, all right, well, we're not going to promote you. We'll promote somebody else that's going to stick around, and, you can go over there and go to selection. And if you make it, if you don't, you'll come back and you'll take your position back and everything else. So obviously wasn't able to go to that selection. When we got back, like, my platoon sergeant had been significantly injured, so we got a replacement to him. Most of the squad leaders had been injured in some capacity or another. Almost every NCO, like, everybody was, and I felt like, man, I want to go do this other thing, but it would be like dereliction of duty for me to just leave and not at least help the platoon rebuild, because there are only a handful of us left. And so I told my chain of command, hey, I'll stick around 16, 18 months until they run the next selection course or whatever, and, kind of help everything get back on track and whatnot. And that, it really ended up being one of the best things that I could have done, because, we got to kind of talk about, like, other than what I saw and what I did, I didn't know all of these other things happened. I end up in an NCO school with guys from another platoon, and we're talking about some of the stuff that they did. And it was like, man, I didn't even know you guys, like, I didn't know you guys were at the crash site, you guys were doing this. So, and he was there, and then, and it allowed us, really kind of good therapy,
Sure.
Just to be within the tribe, to kind of talk through all the stuff, to kind of understand everything that happened, because unless it was something you did or you saw, you don't know all the other things that had happened. So that was probably, one of the best times in the military. Was, okay, we realized what's really important. We know what we need to do with our new guys coming in to get them up to speed so that they're successful if they're in this kind of situation. And we get to kind of talk about all the stuff that happened, almost like after action, but also, just learning everything that happened and being able to talk about it and all that stuff. Here's my therapy guy.
Nice.
Like my comfort kitty.
It probably helped too. It probably helped make you understand some decision making that occurred. Like, why are they doing that? But then when you got the full picture, like, oh, because so-and-so was over here and da-da-da-da. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like that was really good stuff. And then ultimately ended up going to the recon detachment selection course and making it there. And that was kind of my stepping stone to Delta, was, going there and doing some cool stuff and getting some more specialized training and everything else. But that period of time, it was definitely special, and trying to, make a difference and say, hey, just because it's peacetime Army, here are the things that are important, and instill that into the, the new guys that you were responsible for and things like that. Yeah.
What were your thoughts when you found out that they were going to make a movie about it?
So interestingly, I I had gone to selection for Delta and I got selected. And I was back in the recon detachment waiting on orders to go start the operator training course. And that's when the Philadelphia Inquirer online, that's where he started to put the book together. That was happening at that time. And I got a call one night from Mark Bowden, and he said, "Hey, man, you're a key figure in a couple of things that happened, and I want to be able to talk to you about, whatever." And he said, "Look, man, I just got selected to a unit that I'm not supposed to talk about anything. So I don't want to show up there and have done something wrong. So let me talk with, whomever at work that needs to clear this. I'd love to talk to you. I definitely have some things that I'd like to tell you. But let me find out if it's okay." So I ended up, talking with my chain of command. They contacted the USASOC Public Affairs Office, and I was told, I got a call from them directly that said, "Absolutely do not talk with him. We're going to try and shut the whole project down. And we're not going to, blah, 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 blah. So no, don't talk with him." So he called back the next night, or I called him back, whatever it was. And I said, like, "Man, I can't talk to you. I'm sorry. I wish that I could, but, maybe if you can get in touch with so-and-so, they can fill in some gaps for you and things like that." So interestingly, he's going to be involved with the project that I'm releasing later this year, which I think is going to be really cool, because a lot of the questions that I have, there are people that were portrayed in the movie, and I understand there can't be 120 characters in a movie, right?
Yeah.
We've got to condense an 18-hour battle and the buildup and the aftermath. We got to condense this to 5 characters, maybe 6 characters, and we got to make it 90 minutes. And, I get the reason for that. As an example, the main Ranger character, Matt Eversman, is depicted in the movie. And what I'll say is the movie becomes fact to everybody. Every kid that's watched it, that's fact. Well, Matt went out on the initial assault and then ended up back at the hangar when we exfilled Blackburn and Joyce and Dominic Pilla got killed and everything else. And he wasn't allowed to go back out, but his movie did. And so you can imagine being a guy like Matt, who gets asked by everybody that knows his name from the movie, "Well, what happened here?" And he, "Well, I didn't do that. Well, I didn't do that." Or Norm Hooten, who's been turned into, Norm's a buddy of mine, right? He's been turned into a meme. Norm did never talk to anybody. So the majority of that movie is hearsay. It's not even stand up in court, because it's a lot of, "I heard that this guy did this. This guy told me that this other guy did these things." And so I'm not trying to right the wrongs. I want to know from Mark how he went about gathering his information, because of a lot of it's right on point, right on. And a lot of it isn't. But how were decisions made to make this guy the main character versus this guy? Or, it's just interesting to me. And then ultimately how it got turned into a film. My ultimate takeaway from the film, the book, and everything else is I'm glad it was made, because I feel like, it's definitely, it's Rocky, right? It's us taking on Apollo Creed. It's us taking on an entire city and getting out, the best that we could, and doing the best that we could in, a situation that was completely dire, and we were ill prepared. We didn't have the things that we needed to have been more successful. And I'm glad that the story has been made public, So in that regard, I'm glad that it was released. And the one last thing I'll say, just in kind of summary to that whole thing, it wasn't until after Mogadishu, I had a knee surgery, and I was at home for, a couple of weeks. And somebody had sent me Hackworth's book. It was We Were Soldier, one of those kind of books, the Yadrang Valley Battle.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Matterhorn, I think. Or
yeah,
not, whatever it is.
I don't remember. And I started reading it, and it became very apparent because now we've been back for a few months and we had started to piece together the story and everything else. I'm thinking, this guy's writing from a very one person, like, all we know about this battle is what this guy says.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know how much bullshit is mixed in there with, I heard this guy did that, I heard this happen? Like, it's just, so you realize that even these historical accounts of things where people were involved, even talked and helped out with the project, it's so far from the truth, you know?
Yeah.
And so, you know, even pick any military book about the GWAD, you know, whatever, it's this guy's perspective and a whole lot of, you know, hearsay and other things that get added. And I'm not trying to shit talk anybody that's written a book or anything else, but, you know, you got to take all of that with a grain of salt and say, this is one dude's perspective of what happened. And, you know,
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is. It is. I know what you're saying too. You know, like, I think with that book, I don't know. I know what you're saying. Where
again,
maybe people should try to like get more, you know, broader view, bigger overview of what's actually occurring. Try to be more encompassing of the entire situation rather than the first person view. Yeah, I guess it all depends on the story and stuff too. You know, depending on how they do it. But I think that's interesting. I hadn't heard that Everman was, because he's literally in almost every scene. You know, he's like into the scene at night where Tom Satterley had mentioned that they were, you know, basically trapped in a building next to the crash site. That's one of the scenes where they show like Everman trying to help save the Ranger or Delta guy that had been shot in the leg. His femoral artery had been severed. You know, that's got to be tough for him for sure, to be asked about stuff all the time. Be like, dude, that wasn't part of me. You know.
Yeah. Or how about 29 years later when they decide to do an awards upgrade, and everybody and their brother that knows that you were there is asking you, you know, if you got upgraded, and you have to tell them no. Like, you realize what a piece of shit you feel like for like, oh yeah, no, I didn't get upgraded. You know, like 29 years later. So that's kind of really the crux of this project is, you know, it's to say that 29 years later, to the guys that just lived 21 years of war, 29 years after Mogadishu, there's still stuff that's like, it affects people, it bothers people, you know, to get asked about, oh, well, you know, what was it like when you did this? It wasn't me, I didn't do that. And, oh, did you get award upgraded? No, I just got the, you know, the thing that they gave me then. And, you know,
yeah,
it's stuff like that where it, you know, it never like.
What is Hooten? What does he think about that scene where he's like, this is my safety? You know, he holds up his trigger finger like, this is my safety.
Well, that's one of the things that everybody will hear, you know, with this new project is, you know, what's it like to be a person who was basically portrayed in a major motion picture that everybody views as factual, and it was something that you had no control over. Yeah, your real name didn't get used, but everybody knows it's you. And, you know, what's that like? And, you know, how does that affect, you know, if his son's in the military, how does that affect his son that, oh, your dad's this guy, you know?
Yeah, which is the most ridiculous thing that ever. I can't believe that even was in the film, you know?
Yeah. But anyway, that's all stuff that's, you know, I feel like there's a lot of important stories to tell that just never got told. Not about the battle, but more about a lot of the things that people dealt with after the fact. There was a squad leader in the Rangers who directed his squad to engage people on the target building. And he thought they were bad guys. There were people around him getting shot, and he saw people firing from the rooftop and directed his squad to fire at these guys. And it turns out that was not bad guys on the roof. And that dude almost immediately got fired and, you know, spent the past 29 years ostracized from the tribe, you know, not asked because, you know, what a piece of shit for doing this. And, you know, directing his squad to do things like, dude, it's just this ambiguous, nasty situation. And, I can't imagine being that guy living with the trauma of the battle, but not having the brotherhood of, your community to be able to even talk about this stuff. And how does that guy survive? How does that guy, he's alive and well and thriving. And, man, what a fucking powerful story that is.
For sure. Well, that's great that you are working to kind of clear up some of the inaccuracies or whatever you want to call it within the movie and the book and stuff like that. I think bringing a full picture to any event, to any major event, is always that's always important, right? We want the facts to be correct. We want history to see it how it was and not how someone outside of the event completely portrayed it to be, based off of interviews. And we all know from just talking to people get things wrong. I say wrong stuff on this podcast all the time. And not because I'm trying to, but just because talking for 2 hours or whatever, as I'm talking and thinking about what I'm going to say something incorrect. I'll say a unit wrong name or a location wrong and not even think about it until I watch the edit and then go, oh, I'm an idiot. I can't believe I said that, But if I'm talking to someone like that and I say something wrong and don't even realize it till it's way too late, now it's in a movie or something, I think that's awesome that you're working towards that. I think when you get close to whenever that's coming out or whatever it is, whatever the project is, when it comes to a point where you want to market it, you should give me a call and come on here and we'll promote it for sure and try to get the word out to, get the most eyes on it. I also just want to have another interview with you to go on, what was life like beyond this one conflict, because you were obviously in the military for a long time after that, and kind of go through that stuff. Where can people find your information now? Where can they find you at? Social media, website?
So I'll briefly mention, but I started a band a few years ago with the other founding member is a guy that was in the Rangers the same time I was, named Jason Everman. And Jason served in 2nd Ranger Battalion, but was in Nirvana and Soundgarden prior to joining the Army.
That's right. Oh, shit. That's awesome.
So he and I started this band a few years back, and we basically said, hey, we're taking our royalties that we collect from music sales, music streams, etc., and we're giving those to organizations that help first responders and veterans and things like that. So 100% of the royalties from our first album have gone to and are going to Warrior's Heart, which is a physical facility in Texas started by a former Delta Force buddy of mine named Tom Spooner. And it gets first responders and veterans PTSD counseling. It gets them clean, because usually PTSD is the one big ball of really bad stuff, and not just PTSD, but substance abuse and things like that. But the thing that they do that I love is they use art as a form of therapy. Mm-hmm. It could be whatever type. It could be music. It could be sculpting. It could be writing. It could be any of that. And that absolutely speaks to me. So we're giving all of our royalties to that organization to help people that, that awesome. Need. So if you go to Silence and Light Official on Instagram, if you Google Silence and Light, if you Google Brad Thomas Official on Instagram, you'll find our stuff. If you buy music, you're contributing more than if you stream music, but we didn't want to make it a sales only type of thing.
Yeah.
And, if you put something on iTunes, it has to go to Apple Music. And at that point, like, we don't want to be snobs. We want it on Spotify. And so anywhere that you normally get your music, we're on every platform. We've done hundreds of thousands of downloads, which is amazing. Awesome, man. From the beginning, I thought if I can get 5,000 people behind this, that'll be a win. And it's just gone gangbuster. It's not the kind of money, like music royalties isn't the kind of money unless you're Justin Bieber, that you're like riding around in a limo or anything else. But if people want to help offset our costs, like I just dropped 17 grand on mixing and studio time and everything else for album 2. That's my own personal contribution. But if you want to help us like offset costs with staying in hotels and being able to record and those types of things, if you buy merch on our website, any of the t-shirts that we've got, that helps, offset our costs. So we appreciate anything that's done there. So if you look any of those platforms, that's where we are.
That's awesome, man. I'll make sure to put your guys' website in the show description so people can find it there. For my own stuff, people can check me out at Former Action Guys, Former Action News, both on Instagram. J. Kramer Graphics is my website. If you, your unit, some business needs custom shirts or whatever, feel like hit me up, send me the designs that you got. Probably have something for you to order within 48 hours. You guys can start getting your gear. But yeah, man, I really appreciate it, Brad. I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time out of your day to talk about this. And I'm sure it gets old talking about the same thing kind of over and over again. So I hope this was a little bit different, and I look forward to our next conversation, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I feel like it's one of those things where I don't care if it connects with one person. It's a win in my mind, but I guess ultimately my message is, I've lived through some dark stuff, and not in terms of like suicidal thoughts or things like that, but in terms of events. And I've been to combat a bunch of times and been a part of some pretty historic and crazy stuff. And if I can find a way to do something healthy, positive, creative that gives back to the community, if I can figure out a way to do it, anybody can figure out a way to do it. And, everybody's worth it.
For sure, man. For sure. That's a good way to put it. All right, guys. Thanks again.